If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What's the scariest, first, and most convincing true paranormal or supernatural sighting you've ever had? One that still makes you question your beliefs.
I've had paranormal experiences since I can remember, beginning with the house my parents moved us into when I was 4 years old. So many experiences that it's hard to pick one thing. The one that really made me question what the hell I saw was when I lived in Finland for a year after high school in the US. I was dating a young man, and we often spent the night in a small cabin in his family's backyard. One early evening, I walked out to meet my guy, who was already there. The door was open, and when I moved to close it, behind the door was this very short creature in dark clothes and a hat, staring at me, and I at him. It looked male to me. It was just for a few seconds, and it was gone. For years, I thought I saw a ghost, but it never seemed quite right. Years later, in my late 20s/early 30s, I read a book about fae folk around the world, and there it was. Described perfectly. It was a tomte, a type of brownie. It finally clicked after all these years. Everyone I share this story with looks at me like I am crazy. This is the first time I am sharing it online. When I was 15 years old, I lived with a foster family on a 25-acre block in a small town in New Zealand. My foster sister and I decided to go camping at the edge of the small forest at the back of their property. We had a campfire going by our tent and indulged in marshmallows, etc. We decide to turn in for the night and hop into the tent. We chat away before trying to get some sleep. As we are drifting off, we hear the Highland cattle crying out in distress. The Highland cattle are in one paddock across from our tent and one paddock behind that. My foster sister starts to get worried and decides to step out of the tent to check. She checks and asks me to put my shoes on calmly. I question her as I am comfortable and don't want to get up. She starts to get upset and raises her voice with urgency, so I put my shoes on and step out to see what she is angry about. She is looking at the paddock across from the one we are in, and standing beside a tall tree is a figure about 8 or 9 feet tall, with skinny limbs. What appears to be no clothes on, pale skin, and large yellow eyes. The moonlight was reflecting off the figure, so we were able to get a good look. We ran as fast as we could, jumping fences of about 4 paddocks up to the house on the hill. I can say that I have never been so scared in my life. I believe what we encountered was an alien. We never camped again. I don't know if I'm going to sound insane, but now is the best time to do this at 2 a.m. in my room alone. I don't live in a very urban or rural area at all, more like in the middle. My house is relatively new, which is unusual given the context of this story. Some background: I have always been able to see ghosts, though not many people ever believe me when I see them. Sometimes they are so lifelike that I think there's someone living and start talking to them, which looks absolutely insane to someone who is not a seer. As I call what I do, but I have never seen or heard of a skinwalker before this. I was in my room, which faces the long expanse of land that's behind our house, probably about 2 acres of dense forest. I heard this weird clicking noise from outside, and I thought it was a bird, as it was midsummer and sometimes at night there are owls or other birds that make that noise, but it was very repetitive. I think about once per second was the clicking sound, and I tried to ignore it and focus on the drawing I was working on. After about a minute of this, I got tired of it and went downstairs to ask my mom if she heard it, to which she responded that she didn't. I went back up to my room, and the clicking started again. I looked outside, and to my horror I saw a figure. It was hard to tell, but I think about 8 to 9 feet tall, right where my floodlights for the backyard ended, so about halfway between my house and the forest. I freaked out and went closer to the window, and the figure stayed where it was, staring at the room below mine, which was my parents' room, the one my mom was currently in. I ran downstairs and told her to look out the window, and I could still see it, much closer since I was at ground level, but she said she couldn't and told me to get some rest before I passed out. She thought I was going crazy. Maybe I was. After that night, I never saw that thing again, and I still haven't heard or seen anything except the ghosts I usually see. However, I've never encountered anything similar. I don't know what it was, maybe a skinwalker? It had no face and white skin. Tell me what you all think because I don't know. Why we don't leave our summer cabin at night. This story takes place in a very remote wooded area in northern Sweden. At the time, I was about 15 years old. My and my cousin's family were staying in our summer cabin. The cabin is placed on a hill, and at the bottom of this hill there's a lake with a wooden bridge and 2 boats. The property is surrounded by a dense forest, so the only thing you could really see when looking out the window is the hill leading down to the lake and boats. It was maybe 9 p.m. when I, my dad, my sister, my 3 cousins, and their dad decided to light a fire down by the lake. My grandparents, aunt, and mom decided not to go because it was getting late. We just wanted to look out at the lake, stargaze, and chat. We brought our grandparents' dog and our cousin's dog out with us. We walked down to the lake, lit the fire, and started talking. After about an hour, the conversation had fizzled out, but it was a nice silence. Suddenly I started feeling a bit off and couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the woods. We were sitting with our backs facing the woods and the cabin. The feeling was unsettling, but I tried thinking about other things when, out of nowhere, my dad just said, "Yes, I'm good." Everyone turned to look at my dad in confusion since there was no conversation taking place. Dad looked back at the cabin and then at my cousin, who was sitting next to him, and said, "Yeah, I'm doing good." "What?" she responded, confused. "You asked me how I was doing, so I answered," Dad said. "I didn't ask you anything," my cousin said. Dad looked confused and then said that he had felt someone lean over and whisper in his ear, "Hello, how are you?" He described feeling whatever it was, breathing on his neck, and putting a hand on his shoulder. He thought it was my mom at first and turned around but didn't see anything. Right after explaining this, the two dogs that were with us started growling loudly while looking behind where my dad was sitting, towards the woods. We all freaked out, put out the fire, and started running towards the cabin. Yeah, we haven't gone outside the cabin when it's dark ever since, and it's a memory that I'll never forget. But whoever it was nice enough to ask how Dad was doing, so I don't think it had bad intentions. If anyone has any idea what this could have been, please comment. The only thing I can think of is a Swedish nature spirit called Vitra that plays tricks on people but, according to some people, can burn down buildings or capture people if they are bothering them. But they aren't really known for being nice, so I don't know. I think I had my first paranormal encounter. I'm a 17-year-old guy and recently visited some extended family for the holidays, so my family stayed in a hotel for about a week. We all shared the same room. I went to go get some ice, and the ice machine is on the opposite end of the hallway. Midway through my hall, to the left, is another hall, so from my perspective it forms a sideways T-shape. So a little before I get to that little intersection, an old man walks up. A really old man, like he couldn't possibly be less than 80. He was walking slowly, slightly hunched and shaky in that way some old people do, and he stopped when he got to the intersection but didn't acknowledge me, just looked around confused. I said, "Hello," and he widened his eyes and looked at me in sudden shock, like I just woke him out of sleep or something, and I wasn't even talking loud. I asked, "You good?" And he smiled and nodded and pointed at me and opened his mouth like he was going to talk but didn't, just kept on smiling. It was kind of awkward, TBH, so I just said, "Have a nice day," and he nodded again, and I kept walking forward. I turned around a few seconds later, and he was still standing there but not looking at me, just looking lost. I continued on to the ice machine but started to feel bad, like maybe he was someone's lost grandpa, so I turned back around, but he was gone. He wasn't in the hallway I was in, so the only place he could have gone was from the direction he came, and I power walked that way, and he wasn't in that hall either. There's just no way that old man could have moved that fast. The elevator was in the hallway he came from, but even still that entire interaction, from me deciding to go back, was just too quick for him to make his way there and get on, and I can't recall hearing any doors open or close. I honestly think the old man was some kind of ghost, there's just no way. Haunted farmhouse in New Hampshire. Hello, everyone. This is my first time sharing here. So where to begin? In 1999, my wife worked as a radio DJ and accepted a job at a country music station in Lebanon, New Hampshire. After relocating from Maine to New Hampshire, we secured a rental apartment 15 minutes away from her place of employment, despite it being quite remote. Built in 1840, the house boasts 2 floors and an additional apartment on the side. The original owners were a brother and sister. Her name is Helen, and I'm uncertain about his. We originally lived in the small apartment on the side, but when one of the tenants in the house left, we took the bigger apartment. This is when things got intriguing. We used to see people run out of the house, and we would hear the radio or TV turn on or off. As we lived there, Helen would shove really, really hard on the bed to get our attention at night. I would tell her to knock it off and go back to sleep. In 2005 my wife had stage 4 breast cancer, and we had many doctor's appointments. One morning, as we were getting ready to leave for one, she asked me to close all the doors before I left. She then went outside to the truck. A little info on the doors. They were very old and had latches on them. You had to press the handle with your thumb to open them. So I start closing doors and then go on to the next room. I hear the latch to the bedroom and I hear the door creak open. Then I heard the bathroom latch, and the door opened, so to really test her, I closed the door between the dining room and kitchen. The door is warped, and you have to give it a kick to close it. I hear the floor squeaking, and the door latch starts jiggling, so I say, "Come on, open it." The door flew open. It was one of the coolest events I have seen. I don't think Helen was prepared for that kind of reaction from me. Polly passed in 2008 from her cancer, so I had people staying with me to make sure I was okay. One of my friends was staying with me. The next morning I woke up to her not being there and a note on the table. She said that she had gone outside at 3 a.m. to smoke, and as she was sitting on the steps, a woman in an old-style dress walked up the driveway and then turned and walked past her into the house. Helen's grave is just right up the road in a small cemetery. I could go on and on with experiences. I stayed there for one more year and then moved. I just could not stay there with all the memories of Polly. I drove up to the cemetery, found Helen's grave, placed flowers on it for her, and thanked her for watching out for us. I have never been back. Paranormal encounter in Finland. Hi, this is going to be an interesting story, but something I feel like I need to get out there. I've had on/off paranormal encounters since I was young, but it's always freaked me out, so I've always tried to dismiss it and tried to remain logical and skeptical. I've never asked for the experiences and want to live my life normally. However, one of my encounters in Finland shook me to the bone. I was visiting there on a work trip, and I was staying at a hotel in the city. I was awoken by a friend who had to grab an early flight and fell back asleep. When I fell back asleep, I had this very odd/disturbing dream that I was in a bathroom that was disgusting, gross objects/things in this bathroom that I will not describe in further detail. There was a bathtub, sink, fairly modern, bright lights, but again, the disgusting objects in that hotel room made me feel very sick. The door was swinging back and forth in front of me, and I got a really bad feeling and knew I should leave and get out of the bathroom. I grabbed the handle to the door to leave the bathroom, open it, and there is a fairly tall man in what appears to be a green military uniform standing in front of me, blocking the doorway. He has blonde hair, and his head is looking so far down that I can only see the top of his blonde head. I just knew I wanted to leave that bathroom. This was enough to startle me awake, and as soon as I opened my eyes and looked in the corner of the room, I saw the same man standing there headless, not moving, just almost as if he were hovering/lurking there. I didn't feel an evil presence necessarily, more like someone who was lost, but safe to say I was absolutely shook and hid under the covers, telling myself, nope, I'm going to stay here for 5 minutes, then grab my luggage and head down to the lobby early. That's exactly what I did. This stayed with me. Upon researching, I dug up some history and found photos of the same military uniform the man was wearing. To this day, that encounter has remained vivid in my memory, which is why I am sharing this experience. I'm uncertain if anyone else has experienced similar things or understands the message this entity was conveying. Me and my friend saw a ghost for the first time, and it felt so casual. I invited 2 friends over for a sleepover because we needed to finish a project together. Our house has 2 floors, and we were staying in my room on the 2nd floor, and in front of my room were just walls and a hallway. It was around 9 p.m., and my brother and mom were watching TV in the living room below. My bed was positioned across the door, and I and my friend were talking about ideas while sitting at the edge of the bed while our other friend was on her laptop. I usually always keep the door open unless I am sleeping. As I and my friend were talking, I saw him looking at the door, and then I looked at what he was staring at. We saw a pale, man-like figure peeking at us from the corner of the door, with its hands near the light switch. He looked so, we felt dazed for about 3 seconds, then we looked at each other before the figure disappeared. We were really confused, and I just thought my brother or my father was just checking in on us. After that I went downstairs immediately and asked if any of them went to check us out or if our dad already got home. My mom and brother said they never went upstairs, and my dad's running late because he's having dinner out with his company. After that I immediately closed the door, told him we might have seen something else, and started freaking out. We were just surprised at how casual the experience is. We both have experience with sleep paralysis, and we both thought that ghosts would give that dreadful, hopeless feeling. It was creepy, don't get me wrong, we just couldn't believe how normal it felt. I experienced my first paranormal encounter. If anyone has had a similar experience or any explanations of what happened to me, please share. I was just visiting my parents for Thanksgiving and was sleeping on a pull-out couch in their basement. There is nothing in front of the bed that could possibly be mistaken for a person. This is not the house that I grew up in. The previous owner did die in the house, of a stroke, I believe. Last night I woke up around 5 a.m. and looked to see what time it was. I have no clue why I woke up, but I noticed someone was at the foot of my bed. I immediately thought it was one of my brothers and was about to sit up and ask why he was watching me sleep. My eyes focused on him, though, and I realized the person wasn't my brother. It was definitely a tall man, and he was wearing a yellow turtleneck and had a very long neck and long arms. He did not have a face, at least from what I could tell. He had his hand on his hip almost like he was annoyed at me. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep for about 40 minutes after this. As soon as I closed my eyes, the foot of the bed started shaking, and I broke out in a cold sweat and felt extremely nauseous. I said a few Hail Marys under my breath because I was so freaked out. When I got up in the morning, I realized that my dog had moved into the other room at some point that night before I woke up. This is very unusual for him. I online searched the man who had died in this house, and I do have the same name as his mother. This is my first time having a paranormal encounter that I was sure of. My main questions are, what could this thing have been? Why didn't it have a face? Could it have possibly had a face and just not wanted me to see it? The experience that changed my mind on ghosts being real. So this happened a few years ago, and no one ever believes me. But when I was in high school, senior year, about 18, I had just moved to a new town, and I used to walk home from work at night. One night I accidentally took a wrong turn, but I could still get home easily. So I was on the phone with my boyfriend at the time. I was alone on this road, and no one was behind me. All of a sudden I heard a noise behind me. I turned around, and there was a man in a black hoodie behind me. When I say behind me, I mean just a few feet away. I panic and walk a little faster. I looked back, and he was gone. I looked to the other side of the street to see if he went over there, but he was gone. I know there was someone behind me, like I looked into their eyes and they grinned. I ran at this point, so fast I dropped my bag, but I didn't care. I told my BF I had to go, and I just ran home. When I got home, my dad was up and saw I was visibly upset. I told him what happened, and he was sure I just saw something, and I asked him if I wanted to go get my bag. We went to get my bag, and this is when it gets weirder. It was winter, and it had just snowed, but only my footprints were on the sidewalk. And there were no footprints leading to anyone's house. I would love anyone's take on this. When I was about 15 to 17 years old, I was in bed on my phone listening to music when I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. I thought it was my dad and freaked out because I was meant to be asleep and not on my phone. I tried to turn off the music and hide my phone under the covers, but I couldn't turn it off in time, and I heard my dad's steps come up to the end of my bed and stop. I pretended to be asleep, and then when my dad didn't say anything, I turned on my phone light and peeked over the covers to see if he was gone. Instead of seeing my dad at the end of my bed, I see this tall man with dark brown hair and a gray blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He looks like he's been caught in the rain, he's drenched, and he's staring directly above my bed, looking distant. I try to call out to my dad, but I'm lying at a weird angle, and I'm kind of whisper screaming at this point, and he reaches his hand out and grabs the top of my foot over the covers. I can move my toes, but I can't pull my foot away, and I'm hyperventilating now. At this point, I am shaking from fear, so I lay back, take a deep breath, and peek back over the covers. He is gone. I turn on the light under my bedhead and call my friend, super freaked out. They say maybe I had my first experience of sleep paralysis and suggest I try to sleep and take my mind off of it. I decide to sleep with the bed light on. I wake up, and it's off. I asked my dad if he turned it off or the power tripped, but he said no. But the only way to turn off the light is to reach underneath the bedhead to flick it off or turn it off at the wall, and I don't remember turning it off. I then realized that where the guy was looking was where I had placed a dream catcher. Weird coincidence, but I had gotten it the day before, and it wasn't straight, and I hadn't felt right about it not being straight. So I fixed it, and I've never seen him again. I also started sleeping on the other side of my bed because screw that. Initially I thought, maybe I had sleep paralysis. I'd never had it before, though. However, I was able to move my body and toes without feeling pinned. I thought maybe it was a dream, but I could feel his hand on my foot. When I took a deep breath and he left, my music continued to play without interruption. This wasn't my first scary experience, and it wasn't my last. I had one recently. I worked the swing shift, typically from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., at Osan-ab in South Korea. This night wasn't any different. It was time to go home, and I had a truck checked out. This truck is called a bongo and requires you to step up to get into it. Well, during turn-in, you check the gas, grab the keys, and lock the doors. I checked the gas and locked the driver's side door, and as I was walking around, I realized I forgot to grab the keys. Well, I was on the passenger side, which was still unlocked, so I stepped up and reached all the way across where one leg was on the step and another was extended out, Think of how an ice skater looks on ice. Well, for some reason, I got the feeling to look down between my legs, and when I did, I saw a pair of boots standing there. I didn't think anything of it because my friends and I always bug each other. So out loud with a smile on my face I said, "Ha ha, what the duck do you want?" When I stepped down not even a second later, no one was there. I thought they were messing with me somehow. So I just stood there, waiting for them to come out. Nobody was out there but me. I was taken aback when I clearly saw those boots standing behind me. There is no way they could have run inside or gotten away in a split second without me hearing or seeing them. Nothing too crazy, but maybe it was a past me watching me do my job or something. I don't know, it still creeps me out. So this was an ongoing thing. In 2019 I moved in with my current partner into a historic Queen Anne style home in a fairly large city in northeast Indiana. I think the house was built in 1901, and the entire house had a very old world, turn of the century theme going on right down to the light fixtures and furnishings. The layout of our house was sort of strange. The first floor bathroom was right off of the kitchen, and the kitchen was connected to the family room, but in such a way that you couldn't see into the bathroom from the family room. In this particular bathroom, there were two very large, antique mirrors that were original to the house. I refused to go into the bathroom at night because I always just got creepy vibes from those mirrors to the extent that I would avoid looking into the bathroom when I was forced to go into the kitchen at night. There were many nights when I would be sitting on the couch in the family room watching TV, and I would notice out of the corner of my eye a small child peeking around the corner of the doorway at me, but it would always vanish whenever I would directly look at it. I never got bad vibes per se, but it was creepy for sure, and I felt as though I was always being watched, to the extent that I would intentionally close the bathroom door in the early evening so I didn't have to interact with that bathroom at all. We moved a few years ago, but we sold the house to an acquaintance who ended up keeping the mirrors. I really should ask her if she has ever had anything happen or if she gets the same vibe from that bathroom. My first encounter was in 1987. I've had plenty of paranormal experiences throughout my life. I haven't talked publicly about my experiences because a thing that followed me told me not to, plus people who hear my stories think I'm crazy. This is my first encounter with a ghost. I live in the second biggest city in my state, however, when I was a kid, it was just developing. I was in kindergarten when my mom and I moved into a trailer park that had just popped up. It was just her and me. She worked third in oncology at the hospital. So many nights I stayed with my cousins and only slept at home on her nights off. I had bunk beds even though I was an only child. I was afraid of the dark, so I would sleep on the bottom bunk so I could reach the light switch quicker. I would see faces in the patterns in the wood paneling and didn't know it was my brain tricking me. On this particular night, I remember going to bed in the top bunk. My mom tucked me in, which rarely ever happened, and gave me my stuffy. It was a gizmo from Gremlins, Stuffy. I loved that stuffy. But when I woke up in the middle of the night, it was gone. I thought maybe I forgot it. So, I ventured to the living room to recover my lost gizmo. I left my bedroom and turned right to go down the hallway to the living room. When I reached the entrance, I dropped to the floor in terror. There was a large armchair that was near me that I hid behind. And I peeked my head out, around the chair, to confirm what I was seeing. There was a figure in the kitchen. It was just standing there. Or more like floating there. It had no legs. They were gone below the thighs. And her arms, they were gone too. She looked like her arms had been amputated just above the elbows. She had also lost her head, leaving only a slender neck. You may ask yourself how I know it was a female. Well, she was naked, and I could see her breasts and groin. She was so pale, and she just stayed there, in the corner of the kitchen. I felt such sorrow and fear that I started to cry and weep uncontrollably and army crawled my way back to bed. I hid in the bottom bunk until I passed out. When I woke up the next day, I was still on the bottom bunk, however, I had gizmo. Then I went out to greet my mom, who was cooking breakfast. She greeted me with the usual good morning as she made coffee, and I replied, "That's where she was last night." My mom immediately asked, "Who?" I simply replied, "The ghost." She dropped everything and immediately inquired about my experience. As it turned out, when she got up in the morning, the front door was wide open. I told this story to a longtime friend and tattoo artist of mine while getting ink once. He asked me what my mom would say when asked about this story. I told him she could confirm it and had him call her on the spot. He asked, she confirmed, and then the power went out in the building immediately. It could be a coincidence. I was visited later by the thing, and it specifically told me not to tell anyone. It's been 20 years. I will share an experience that, to this day, spooks me the hell out. I don't live in a haunted house. I know this because I am sensitive, and if there's something around me, it's generally not long before I pick it up. I do seem to attract things, though, and have been told by people more attuned and sensitive than I that I am a beacon to the dead. At the time that this happened, my husband was on business in the States, and I was home with two very protective Rhodesian Ridgebacks. I don't sleep well, and with my husband away, I was up late on the internet or journaling. It was roughly 3 a.m. on one of those nights, and I could not get drained enough to go to bed but figured I should try anyway. I shut everything down, locked the doors, and crawled into bed with the male dog, a tank of a specimen that thought it was his duty to make sure I was okay at all times. I hadn't even settled and gotten comfortable before I saw a man standing at the foot of my bed. He seemed lit from within, and save for his short red hair and beard, everything about him looked gray, like a black and white picture. He screamed at me to help him, and although I never saw him move, I felt a hand smack against my legs. The shouting felt louder than it actually was, though somehow muffled, as though he were screaming at me through an invisible wall. Not going to lie, while I am normally very calm when encountering the unexplained, this experience really freaked me out. Not only was there a ghost man yelling at me, but my dog was not responding to this. He was dead asleep. I don't even know where the other dog was, but the dog at my side seemed almost sedated. Even though it was only a few seconds, it felt like hours before I summoned the courage to yell back, informing him that he was dead and needed to go in peace. My scream woke the dog, and I glanced his way. When I looked back up, the man was gone. This happened roughly 10 years ago. I've not seen this man since. When I was 8, I had my first paranormal experience. The first encounter was with my stepfather of that time, my mother, and my brother. We were living in a rented house of a suicide victim. Of course, they didn't tell my mom or my stepfather about it when they first rented, but the neighbors did tell us after a month of living there. So at first everything is fine, only an odd feeling about the garage and the dead forest behind the house, and when I say dead forest, I mean like a straight line of dead trees that just keeps going for miles, but when you look to the left and to the right of the house, the rest of the forest is green and luscious. Anyways, my mom was working at night, so we would be with her boyfriend from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. During the daylight we kept seeing black shadows going by in the corner of our eyes, but we'd look and nothing was there until my brother and I saw it on the floor going up to the attic, but it wasn't really an attic, more like an empty space in between the roof and the house. One night everything was shaking like there was a huge storm outside the windows, and the doors were shaking. Then the TV went static, and my brother went catatonic. I was faced with my stepfather looking at me with the creepiest smile I've ever seen, and he said to me that the banging I was hearing was monsters trying to get in and that we would get eaten alive, and he just kept going, saying weird stuff to scare me with the blackest of eyes, like his pupil was so huge and he was another person telling this story about those monsters outside. I know I'm going to sound crazy, but at one point I saw a wolf-like figure with red eyes at the door of the patio transforming into a man-like black figure with yellowish eyes. I was so scared I can't believe I didn't pass out or something. I kept looking back at my brother and calling his name, but he had no response, only dead staring at the static of the TV, looking like a total zombie. Meanwhile, the doors and windows were still shaking and banging, there were no storms outside, no wind, nothing, the trees were not even moving outside the windows. Then, after what felt like a real-life nightmare that I couldn't wake from, I remember looking back at my stepfather and seeing 3 white female figures standing behind him, smiling at me in a way I can't explain, but it felt as if they were saying to me, "You are safe, and you are not alone." This gave me the courage to overcome my fear. I grabbed my stepfather's arm and yelled at him to stop it now while looking straight into his black eyes and watching his pupils shrink back to normal within seconds, as if whatever was happening inside him had vanished. Poof. And suddenly I was face to face with a scared and panicked grown man that kept asking me what had happened, seeing that I was in tears and my brother was white, looking dead on the couch. The TV went back to normal, no more banging, everything had stopped suddenly. I asked him if we could leave the house for the night until my mom came back. He then took the keys, and we stayed in the car a couple of streets away from the house and waited for my mom to come back in the early morning. I was confused and mad at him. I didn't want to speak to him and told everything to my mom the next day, and the following week we were moving from that house and leaving him behind. Apparently, my mom told me after, he had summoned a demon with one of his friends a couple of months prior to moving into that house, and he was having suicidal thoughts and losing parts of his days that he couldn't remember. He felt like he was going crazy and, with reason, was getting pretty scared. They even went to a priest. Anyways, that's the end of the story of my first encounter with the paranormal. I experienced a few other events, which frightened me, leading me to pray that I would never see or hear anything related to the paranormal again and that I would remain as oblivious as possible to it. I never saw, heard, or felt anything in years. During my time in grad school at UNC Wilmington, I encountered a roadblock while attempting to complete a paper around 11 p.m. I decided to get in my truck and take a drive out to the end of the road. My family calls it that because US 421 just dead ends into a parking lot and boat launch on the Cape Fear River. When I reached the end of the road, which is a couple of miles away from the nearest location, I found that my truck was the only vehicle present. I am absolutely certain that I was alone. I parked, got out of my truck, and started walking around the base of Battery Buchanan toward the shore of the river. Battery Buchanan was an artillery battery that was part of the Confederate Fort Fisher complex during the Civil War. It was the site of multiple large battles. As I approached the river, approximately 25 yards from a small sandy beach, I saw the black silhouette of a person appear on the beach. It didn't stand up or anything, I was not there, and then it was just there. I instantly got scared. I've lived my whole life in wilderness areas and been stalked by mountain lions, and I have never been frightened like that. All of my hair was on end, and I had goosebumps. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds staring off at this completely black silhouette that had no details, was completely flat black, but was solid, and was blocking the lights coming across the river from the Sunny Point cargo docks. Then it was gone. I didn't blink or turn or look away, it just disappeared and wasn't there while I had been staring at it. Fight or flight went to full afterburner, and I got back in my truck and noped out of there immediately after that thing vanished. What's strange to me is that I am absolutely convinced it was something supernatural, but Fort Fisher really isn't known for having much, if any, of this kind of activity. I have only ever had one other experience that I believe is supernatural, but there were also some unlikely but plausible explanations for that. I have never been able to come up with a plausible alternative explanation for what I saw that night by the river, though. My friend and I were urban exploring at an old abandoned school and found a classroom with a giant chalkboard. We started fooling around and drawing different things on the board when we heard a strange dragging sound behind us. We both whipped around, and at first everything was still and quiet. We waited with bated breath, trying to figure out what made the sound, and not 5 seconds later, a couple of desks from the first row shot towards us on their own accord. We jumped out of the way and stood there for a split second trying to figure out exactly what we were seeing. It was a second too long as the back row of desks streaked across the floor and hit the opposite wall. We bolted out of there. I don't think I ever ran so hard out of an abandoned place before, and I've had to run from cops. I've tried a few times to bring up this situation to my friend, but she will not talk about it. So I assume we both saw the same thing? It's something I constantly think about and try to figure out what exactly it was we saw. A haunting that still hasn't left me. I used to live in a haunted house. There were plenty of the usual events that became almost normal to me and my family. Many of them became almost boring to hear about again since it was just so common. The basement lights would always get turned on by themselves, boxes in my bedroom and the attic would get thrown, constant footsteps on the second floor when nobody was awake. The usual. My mom and I have been fans of ghost hunters for a while, and we take their system of if there's doubt, throw it out very seriously. There were plenty of things we were able to debunk ourselves. The voices in my mom's room were the neighbors yelling, the cupboards were falling off the wall so they were tilted, etc. But there was one thing that happened that still haunts me now. Most of the activity was on the second floor. That's where we would hear footsteps at night, have things thrown, and have some questionable bedside manners. To give an idea of what was up there, it was a single wraparound staircase leading from the kitchen to a tiny hallway connecting 2 bedrooms. The one next to the stairs was my aunt's room, and mine was at the end of the hall. My room had the door to the attic in it, so I had the pleasure of closing the door every time the air pressure change from shutting my door made it swing open. I had only one window in my room, facing both doors that were along the wall on the opposite side. My bed was at the left of the doors, as far away from the attic as I could put it. I'm going to tell a few experiences that led up to the one that still freaks me out to this day. I feel like it's important to note down the escalation. Looking back on it now, I feel like I should have expected something like that to happen, but the events happened months apart from each other. Okay, so to start off, both the attic and my aunt's room would have unexplained footsteps. My aunt often complained about hearing someone pacing around her bed but never seeing anyone when she turned on the lights. Once, while she was out of state for a work trip, I decided to stay in her room. She had a nice bed and AC, and I wanted to get out of the heat. My window had no insulation around it and would let in whatever temperature it was outside. I was lying half in and half out of the sheets, scrolling on my phone. I was lying in a position that faced the door to enter the room, with the AC unit located behind me. While I was lying there, I suddenly felt the bed dip behind me. It felt like an adult person had just sat on the bed. I actually felt myself sink into it a bit. Now you're going to quickly learn that my first instinct in paranormal situations is to hide under the covers. I'm completely serious. When I felt the bed dip, I threw the sheets over my head. I hid under there for longer than I care to admit. While under there I felt the pressure in the bed go away gradually but heard nothing of anyone walking away or leaving. The wooden floors under the carpet were notoriously squeaky. I would have heard it if it was a person. After that I started to actually see a figure in my room. The first time I had woken up in the middle of the night, so I can't really say if I had been daydreaming or something. All I know is that I saw a blacked out figure standing next to my bed, blocking the light from the moon shining through my window. I panicked, threw the blanket over my head, and turned to stare at the wall, laughing out loud. I didn't hear anything except me trying to stay quiet. I nervously went back to sleep, hoping it would be the end of it. It was not. I would continue to see a figure watching me whenever I was in bed. It seriously disturbed me. That leads me to the incident that I can't erase from my head. I had been lying in my bed trying to brainstorm ideas for an art project. Typically, I close my eyes during brainstorming to gain a clearer mental image of the project I intend to work on. Once I had something in mind, I blinked my eyes open to get up and write things down. Only when I opened my eyes was there someone leaning over my head. They had their body on my pillows behind me and had their head leaning over my face upside down. My first thought was that my cousin was pulling some practical prank and had a mask and black clothes on. Within moments I had thrown the blanket over my head in a panic. After trying and failing to calm down, I peeked out from under the covers and saw nobody there. I threw off the covers and ran out of my room. It didn't feel safe to be alone, so I found my aunt in the living room and joined her. She saw how shaken I was and asked me what was wrong. I told her everything and was horrified to find out that my mom was sleeping and that we were the only ones awake in the house. I drew a terrible drawing of the face I saw, but I'm honestly hesitant to add it because of how low the detail is. I had drawn it to show my aunt and later my mom what I saw. Thankfully, I still have my sketchbook where I drew it, even after 4 years. I can't even give myself the comfort of saying, maybe it was sleep paralysis? I effortlessly threw the blanket over my head. I've never had hallucinations, and I only saw the figure while in that house. I don't know what was in that house or why it kept watching me sleep, but I hope every day that it didn't follow me when we moved. My first time encountering a ghost was when I was a child. My whole life I have encountered paranormal activity. When I was around the age of 5 to 6, my parents moved us to a house that was literally located beside a cemetery. While we lived there, now that I look back at it, we always witnessed hearing things being moved and hearing our names being called. Within the few years that we did live there, I vividly remember one evening when I was lying in bed doing homework. I was around 8, when I kept hearing my room door being cracked open, but every time I looked back, I couldn't see anyone. I have a brother who is older by a year and a few months, so rationally, I thought it was him just trying to be annoying. After hearing the door crack the second time, I got up and said, "Stop trying to distract me, I'm doing homework." I didn't hear any noise, so I got up, turned on the hall light, and walked across to his room. To my surprise he wasn't there, so I just walked back, leaving the light on so I could see him approaching the next time. I go back to my bed. This time I lie facing the door, and soon enough I start seeing a shadow creeping up. I yell, "Mom, tell _ to stop bothering me." As soon as I said this, the shadow disappeared like it was backing up quick. My mom responded, What are you talking about?" I proceeded to tell her everything that just happened, to which she replied, "Your brother has been sleeping in my room next to me for the past hour. There's no way he was running back and forth from my room to yours." One that always makes me pause is when my brother and I were children playing a game in my bedroom closet. I assure you, it's not as crazy as it sounds. Anyway, the game was seeing if we could survive in the darkness of my closet until our mom got home from work. We prepared ourselves with only a single apple each, a bottle of water in my hand, and my brother's brand new 3DS in his. Just for telling the time, he had said. We even made it an entire 45 minutes and were quite proud of the fact. As we sat squished on top of my toy box, the small light from my brother's screen was the only illumination around, and we both grew very quiet. Both my eyes and his were riveted on the opposing wall. It was a bare wall. I didn't have clothes hanging up in the way or anything, just a couple of boxes and stuffed animals strewn on the ground. Or at least, it was supposed to be a bare wall. Instead I saw the dark silhouette of a tall man looming high up, almost to where the top of his head could reach the ceiling. I asked my brother if he saw it too, and he quietly replied that he did. We bolted out of that closet faster than I did in 2016. We later described what we saw to each other, and it was exactly the same. I've wondered about that ever since. It couldn't have been our silhouettes, since it was only that of a single man. My brother was constantly moving as a kid, and I doubt his 3DS would have stayed still long enough to cast such a shadow and keep it there if that was the case. I don't know what was going on there, and that's the problem, I guess. Leaves me questioning both my brother and myself. I was 7 or 8 years old at the time. It was around midday, and one of my sisters was at her friend's house, while the other was in her room. My dad was outside in the backyard mowing the lawn, while I and my mom were in the workout room in our basement. My basement is average sized, and all of the floors are carpeted. Our basement stairs go straight down, and as soon as you get to the bottom of the stairs, to the left is the workout room, and to the right is the rest of the basement. There is also a corner leading to the storage room. But, while my mom was exercising on the treadmill, I was on the ground showing her my new toys my grandma got me. She ended up getting off the treadmill and asked me if I could get her some water from upstairs. So, of course I went to get her the water. But, as I was exiting the workout room and I closed the door, I looked up, and right by this pole we have in our basement, there was a super tall, disfigured shadow that slowly walked past me and walked in the direction of the storage room. I was terrified, and I ran up the stairs, and I never got my mom's water. She later came upstairs and asked why I hadn't come back downstairs with her water. I explained to her what had happened, but she didn't believe me and insisted that it was just my imagination, so I decided to forget about it and move on. Nothing really happened for a few months until this one day. So, I was sleeping in my older sister's room, and she woke up at around 6 to get ready for school. It was also very dark outside since it was the winter. I ended up just going back to sleep. She ended up waking me up at around 7 to start getting ready for school, and at the time my school started around 8:30 while my older sister's school started at around 7:30. So, as she woke me up, I left her room to go get dressed, and I immediately froze with fear, just looking at this thing that was in my room. My door was wide open, and right against the wall, closest to the end of the door, stood this thing. It appeared like a normal person, but I could tell it wasn't. Also, it was breathing really heavily, like it was running away from something. It was wearing a long white dress with pretty lace on it. This thing also had a lovely flower headband. I also remember it wearing a tiny silk bracelet on its right wrist. It had pretty long curly brown hair. Its back was adorned with enormous white wings. Now I know you might be thinking, that doesn't sound like a demon at all. But whatever it was, it had an evil presence, especially when it looked at me. We just stared at each other for what seemed like 5 minutes, but in real time, it was definitely around 3 seconds. Something strange was right after it was done staring at me. It seemed like I wasn't supposed to see it or something because it immediately ran into my room, and then I couldn't see it anymore. I ran to my older sister's room and started crying. I told her what happened, but she obviously didn't believe me, so she went inside my room and said, "See, look, there's nothing here." But I know what I saw, and when this incident happened, I decided not to tell anyone because I knew they wouldn't believe me. About a month after this happened, my aunt was over, and she and my mom were trying to set up mouse traps to put in the garage. I was watching them, trying to figure out how to actually set the mousetrap up. But my mom asked if I could get my candy from my room, which was beside my bed and my nightstand. I asked her if I could just get her something from the kitchen instead because I didn't want to go in my room. She asked why I didn't, but I didn't want to tell her, because I knew she was going to say it was my imagination. My aunt asked if I could tell her if she was a Christian. So, I knew she would at least believe me. She then took me to our dining room and asked me to tell her, and when I did, my aunt said, "Don't be scared, you saw your angel." That did make me feel better. But my question is, if what I saw was really my angel, why would it run away? Why did I feel unsafe going into my room? This is why I think I encountered something like a demon. But, let me just add, it didn't have a nice presence. I am 13 years old now, and as I'm typing this on my laptop, I still think about that thing I saw. Am I crazy, or are there little goblins or ghosts in my house? This experience occurred when I was around 10 years old, almost 11, and at that time, I lived with my little brother, who was about 1.5 to 2 years old. He was still crawling on the floor, much like a baby. Well, what happened was that one day they left him with me to take care of him. It wasn't just one day, there were several days that I had to take care of him. What happens every time I take care of him? In the afternoons when I started to cook something for my brother and myself, I felt that someone was watching me, and when I turned around, there was nobody. I clarify that my little brother was a baby attached to me, he didn't like me to be away from him, he was always by my side. Well, as I kept saying, every time I was cooking, something told me, don't look back. You know that voice in our head that warns us about something? Well, I didn't pay attention to that little voice in my head, and I turned around, and my blood froze. There was a small shadow, like half my waist, to say so, and I stood still and then ran to the hallway and went to my room. I came and grabbed my brother and went to my room, but there was no one. Then another day passed, and again I felt watched, but again the little voice told me to grab your brother and take him to the kitchen, and when I grabbed my brother, he started to cry, and I saw something behind me, and then it looked at me, and I hugged it, and I told it, there is nothing to worry about, my baby. I will protect you. Then that day I turned around again, and when I turned around again, the shadow came out running, and after that day, nothing else happened until today. I still live in the same house. I don't know if my brother felt that spirit, but I felt that whoever saw it or felt it would believe you. I play hide and seek with a ghost. Here's my ghost experience. My family meets for dinner every Tuesday night at my grandparents' house. Everyone comes, aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. It's a tradition that's been going on for over a decade now. We teens/kids are usually pushed to play outside, and being that my grandparents' house is on a decent-sized property, we tend to explore and make up games. Well, recently our favorite game is flashlight hide and seek in the dark. The rules are simple. Wait till it's dark out, the seeker has a flashlight, you shine it on someone and say their name. If you are right, they have to go sit on the porch until the game is over. If you are wrong, the person can hide again. We play until everyone is found or we have to go home. Usually there are at least 6+ people hiding and 1 to 3 seekers. Not long after playing this game every week, we started noticing after a few rounds that someone extra was playing and would hide in unusual places that were hard to reach and dangerous but very obvious if you shone the light in them. Locations such as a pricker bush, within a tree, beneath the shed, and in the window of the deserted RV have been frequented. At first we thought it was our younger cousin, who didn't normally follow the rules and would hide in odd places and then claim they were never found. We always thought he was lying and let it go. One night we were playing, and I saw my brother hiding in a spot, and he yelled at me to move away when I tried to join him. I was forced to run across the way and hide on the other side of the swing set from him in some trees. The only obstacle separating us was a large pricker bush that no one would choose to hide in. We were giggling during this game because my sister was the seeker, and she kept walking past us even though we were very poorly hidden. She shined the light close to my brother and me, at the bush between us. This made us go quiet, and my sister said, "I found you. Come out. I see you." She broke the rules by naming every kid that was still playing the game. There were only 4 people left hiding. For a second I stood up because I thought she was talking about me, and my brother stood up too. That's when someone stood up right in front of my sister from the bush between us. What made it so much more heart-stopping was that it didn't even make a sound when they stood up from the prickers. Nothing caught their clothes, no leaves rustled, silence, and yet they stood up quickly. Neither my brother nor I have ever seen this kid before. He was too short for any kid playing the game, even my little cousin was taller than this kid. My sister said, "Who are you?" before she screamed and threw the flashlight at the kid. I didn't take my eyes off the kid, I was frozen in place. The flashlight just flew right into the bushes where it should have hit the kid in the chest, and as soon as the light disappeared into the branches, the kid sat back down and crawled backwards back into the bushes, never making a sound till he was gone. My brother and I remained motionless on the floor. We ran off and asked our sister what happened to confirm our stories. She said that she swore she could see right through him, but he had no arms or eyes. That was only the first time we realized that there was a ghost playing with us. Since then, we would see him hiding from time to time. Sometimes we will go looking for him to call him out. He usually just stands up and disappears. Over 20 people, and counting, have found him. We invite anyone to play as the seeker to find him. Even a few adults have seen him when playing with us. I didn't believe in ghosts till this game, and now I'm determined for people to play if they don't believe. When I was 13 in Gettysburg, I was with my mom, my 2 younger brothers, and my uncle. We were leaving the park as it was closing time. For the life of me, I cannot remember what part of the battlefield we were at, I just remember it being so dark and having to make this sharpish turn. As we were making the turn, I saw 3 people ahead of us in the high beams. Then my mom asks us if we all saw them. We all collectively say yes. There were 2 men in Union uniforms and a woman with her sleeves scrunched up to her elbows, and her hair was up. They all had a dead expression. I can't explain it any other way. but at first we think they might need help. I get out with my mom, with flashlights. We look around, shining them everywhere. There's no evidence of anyone ever being there. The ground was dirt, so you'd think we would see footprints. But the only footprints were ours walking up to where we saw them. They were just gone. After we get back into the van, my mom just realizes that they didn't even try to shield their eyes as one would do from a sudden bright light of high beams. This is just an experience that I think about a lot. Obligatory, I know this sounds fantastical and wild, and I agree. This is in fairly remote backcountry West Virginia, which is known for being old and haunted. It was experienced entirely by 2 of us, but the worst parts by all 4. As a result, all 4 of us faced personal issues in our lives at some point, which I believe were directly caused by this encounter. The following is, at least to my memory and what I've been able to corroborate with the other people that were there, 100% accurate and true. When I was 17, 2004, we had a bad experience camping near haunted train tunnels and sites of sudden tragic death. History of the immediate, 1 square mile, area, mother and son drowning in the creek nearby. The old man hung himself from this old dead tree that hung over the water. Cliché creepy dead hanging tree, I know. Drug dealers were ended in a state police shootout at a nearby hunting cabin, and many, many years before, cheap laborers had been killed building this double set of train tunnels. They were actually buried in a long-forgotten little graveyard nearby the tunnels that has since been found and restored. We decided to go camping before graduation as a friend group of 4 just to do something one last time before we all went our separate ways in life. This is private property on the backside of a big forested hill around which the creek flows in a huge, several-mile-long bend. Camp set up, fire going. Shortly after nightfall, my cousin and I sat on the creek bank maybe 20 yards away from camp, spotlighting fish in the water. We began to hear a rhythmic slosh of what sounded like someone wading through the water maybe halfway up their shin, so we shined the light around upstream. We then spotted the symmetrically and rhythmically consistent disturbance made by what looked and sounded like invisible feet/legs sloshing towards us. When we would turn our spotlight off, it would start. It would stop when illuminated. It was reacting to us, and this was the first ice bucket stomach clench moment we knew this was not fish and could not rationalize what was happening. This scared us pretty badly, but we decided it was best to keep it to ourselves and join the others gathered at the fire. As we made our way back, we heard the sloshing make it to where we were on the bank, and the noise stopped. Given the speed we witnessed it moving and how far it was from us when we were watching it, it must have sped up to make it to the bank we were on and the amount of time it took us to get back to camp. Others at the camp heard it as well and figured we had either gotten in or somehow riled up some fish, but we just played it off. It sounded and looked like an invisible person wading towards us through the water. After the noise ended at the creek bank, we all saw the tall grass disturbed as something we couldn't see ran around the foliaged perimeter of our circularly cleared campsite. This could have been an animal, but it was fast. We then began to hear what sounded like a man talking to us, as in speaking into the ear of each person, the left ear if that matters. At first it sounded garbled, but after maybe 15 to 20 seconds we could make out the words saying we shouldn't be there and we needed to leave, before finally addressing us directly and saying slightly more forcefully, "You need to leave." Obviously this was terrifying, and at first we thought there was a person or group of people out there walking up on our camp, and that is dangerous. We were all frozen with fear, but then adrenaline hit. As we freaked out and started to run to our ATV, all 4 of us saw a tall black shadow man wearing what looked like a hat, relaxing against the front of our ATV. It straightened up when we saw it and it saw us, and it just sort of hung there staring at us for a few seconds. No feet. The legs ended in sort of wavy lines, like looking above the fire at the heat waves. It stood out against the dark night behind it. The girl screamed, which broke our fear freeze, and it zipped like the flash back towards the train tunnels people had died in. Interestingly, when we went to start the ATV, it turned over sluggishly as if the battery had been slightly drained, despite working fine not long before when we rode it down. This entire event happened over the course of maybe 5 to 10 minutes and within an hour of the sun going down. After putting our story out there, I received a lot of feedback from people who have also had bad encounters in this area over many years. Even a guy I worked with, who I didn't know knew this area, told me that my uncle had hired him to trap in that area, and it was the only place he didn't check traps alone at night. He said it was almost like the animals leave that place at night. No less than a month later, my uncle, who owns the property, was up on the hill raccoon hunting at night with a dog. At some point the dog was on a rock face up above him and knocked a large rock loose that fell and struck my uncle in the side of the neck. This understandably messed him up pretty badly and paralyzed almost his entire body, but he still had limited functionality on his left side. We could never figure out how he got himself back to his ATV, turned it around, and drove himself out of there. It wasn't until probably 2 or 3 years later, around Halloween, when my story made its rounds on the local Facebook groups, that my uncle texted my mother out of the blue. You have no reason to believe my uncle's character reference, but he is a salt of the earth, hunting, farming, working man, even working past his retirement as a millionaire. Honest, funny, just an incredibly stand-up guy. He is easygoing but also no nonsense. In his text to my mother, he said, "I've never told anybody this before, and I probably won't again. The man in the hat the kids saw at the creek that night helped pick me up off the ground, put me back on my ATV, and get me turned around. Until I heard that, I had always assumed that the shadow man was the one who was trying to scare us out of there, but thinking back on it, maybe he was the one whispering to us, telling us we needed to leave and possibly avoid something scarier and more dangerous, although I have no idea what could have been scarier than that." The first time I witnessed a ghost was in high school. I was visiting a friend and walked into his house. Just off from the front door was the living room. Turning around, I saw a woman by the window, her attire more reminiscent of a woman from the 1950s. Which I thought was odd. I smiled at her, and she smiled back and faded from sight. My jaw must have dropped because my friend said, "You saw her, didn't you?" That was the start of my paranormal journey. Since that time, I have seen and heard all manner of activity, from the mundane to the worst you could imagine. In my home, we have 3 spirits. One is a small girl, maybe 10, she wears a bright colored dress and has blonde hair. We will see her darting around corners or letting out the occasional giggle. She likes to tap on things from one side of the house to the other. She is a busy one, but we do not see her every day. We also have a shadow person, I believe it is a woman. She shows up very infrequently. But when she does, her favorite thing to do is stand in the middle of our hallway for about a minute or two and then just fade out. I ran into her about 2 years ago. I was headed back in from having a cigarette, and she was in the hall. We must have stared at each other for about 30 or 40 seconds. I said, "It's your move," and she faded out. The third one is also a shadow, but a 2-dimensional shadow. This shadow likes to walk past windows at night. We see it on the east side of the house. It walks very close to the window. My wife was the first one to see it. She was in her office. She called like she was scared to death and said she saw a man by her window. I took my dogs with me, and there was nothing there, of course. But my dogs will bark like nuts if a bird farts 10 feet from a window, so they should have reacted to someone getting into our yard, but they did not. My wife also said there was no noise. We have gravel on that side of the house, no sound at all. Well, these are just a few of my experiences. None have been frightening, I'm afraid, at least these ones that I have shared. I had something scary happen in our house we recently moved from. For context, we lived in Alaska and had a big open backyard. The backyard was abundant with trees, berries, flowers, and vegetables. I left the backyard door open, so I attribute that as possibly how it came to get in the house, but I'm not sure. My son was a baby at the time, like your brother. Crawling and around 1 to 2 years old. I'd put him down for a nap upstairs and go downstairs to take care of things. We'd lived there for several years when, out of the blue, I started hearing running around up there. The bedroom was right over the kitchen and living room. It was unmistakable steps and sounded like they were running. One day my oldest was home and heard it. He asked me about it. Every time I heard it, I'd run upstairs and look in the room. My baby was sleeping, and nothing was there. This happened countless times. One night when we were going to bed, my feet were hanging off the end. I fell asleep and woke up to the sensation of someone pinching my foot. I thought my oldest had snuck in, playing a trick on me, but when I looked, no one was there. I chalked it up to a vivid dream. I closed my eyes and felt it again. I shot up and looked. Once again, no one was there, but I heard lots of running around underneath the bed. This is when I started thinking it could be a little person or something. And no, I wasn't brave enough to look under the bed. Finally, one night I woke up, and I swear to you, I saw the shadow of a small person, probably a foot tall or so, standing on top of my dresser. It very slowly crouched down. It freaked me out, and I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, it was gone. Between all of this, the most common thing was the footsteps upstairs. They got bold, and you could hear them when we were in the room under the bed at times. My oldest experienced it, and so did my mom. She came to stay with us, and one day she asked me if I thought the house was haunted. I asked her why, and she told me she was hearing footsteps. Finally, one day my mom and I could hear the footsteps when suddenly there was a huge boom. My heart dropped into my butt. My baby was asleep upstairs. I sprinted upstairs so fast and kept expecting to hear my baby crying. My mom was running up behind me. I threw the door open and, nothing. My son was sleeping peacefully. At that point I was pissed off and started looking under the bed. Lifting pillows and throwing things around. I'm sure they were laughing at me. We moved, and it instantly stopped. I can't say I miss it. I believe your story and have read different ones that have different intentions. So trust your gut and protect your brother. I think I had my very first paranormal experience last night. Hey, everyone. I wanted to share with you what I believe was my first ever paranormal experience, or at least, I really can't explain it. I have always been a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, maybe because I never had anything unexplainable happen to me in 26 years, that is, until last night. I was walking down a path next to big, open fields. It's one of the routes I take back from the train station after work. It was about 10:30 p.m. It was completely dark, but the path was slightly lit by a few sparse street lamps. I never felt unsafe in that area, and I've walked that path 100 times without any issues. It's always completely dead besides an occasional dog walker, and I actually quite enjoy how empty and peaceful it is at night. I had my headphones in, walking along, when I suddenly got that very cliché feeling of someone else's presence near me. You know that feeling when you can sense someone's presence behind you and you fully expect for someone to just walk past you in a second. I turned around, and there was no one there, but the feeling didn't go away. It was completely overwhelming, and as cliché as that may sound, I had never experienced that before and was starting to get a little freaked out, as it caught me totally off guard. I removed my headphones and accelerated my pace, but I was certain that someone was trailing me. I kept looking around, but there wasn't another person in sight. At this point, as real as it felt, I could have put it all down to some kind of weird paranoia. However, as I sped up, I suddenly felt something push down on my left shoulder. It's difficult to describe it as it happened very quickly, but it felt as if someone put their fist on my shoulder and pushed down on it, as if to try and keep me in place. There was quite a lot of force to it as well, enough that my knees bent under the weight of it. I immediately turned around, only to discover that no one was present. I was thoroughly freaked out by this point and started sprinting home. The feeling of someone's presence disappeared as soon as I turned left into another street and off the path. When I got home, I told my girlfriend about what happened. She's pretty into this paranormal stuff, the opposite of myself, and suggested that I must have encountered some kind of wandering spirit and got its attention. I can't believe I am even considering this to be a possibility. Sorry guys, I know this all probably sounds cliché and not very exciting, but I know what I felt, and I never thought something like that would actually be possible. I cannot explain what happened, but I definitely felt a presence near the fields last night. Tales from my life in New Mexico. So I have a few different stories from around New Mexico over the years. The first is from when I was a kid. My grandmother worked at Fort Bayard Medical Center, and I and my sister would spend a week with her every summer. She would take us to the unit she worked on and give us a tour of the whole facility. The last time we were going around the facility, I was around 8 and my sister 10. My grandma decided that we were old enough to use the underground tunnels between the buildings instead of going outside and back in. The tunnels were just a few hallways that linked the morgue to the two units, if my memory serves. As we were walking from the south ward to the north, about halfway between the two wards, the hallway split, and the spur that went to the morgue split off to the east. I looked down that hallway, nothing out of the ordinary at first glance. As I turned to keep walking, I noticed it got seriously cold for a second, like down into the 40s. Now, it was cooler in those hallways, but never that cold in the summer. Then I heard someone walking up behind me in what sounded like heavy boots. I turned around and saw a man in what I now recognize as a Civil War era wool uniform and polished black boots carrying a rifle. I was surprised but interested. The man walked up and stopped in front of me, looking ahead of me and looking around. I looked up and noticed first it was a black man and second that he was bleeding from a wound on his forehead. It was a long, straight cut that ran from above his left eye and wrapped around the side of his face. He looked to be speaking, but I felt like I was underwater. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying. Then he disappeared, and I turned around like, where did he go? I saw my grandma waiting for me at the door at the end of the hall. I didn't run but walked pretty quickly to her and asked if she had seen anything in the hallway. She said no, I was just standing there looking around. She had been calling me, but it was like I was just ignoring her. The second story is much more recent. I was working security at a Native American casino when the world shut down for COVID. Everyone but a few departments, namely security, surveillance and custodial, was at the facility for cleaning and to keep the facility secure and clean exceptionally well. During this time a few different things happened to me. I worked the night shift for the first half of the shutdown. One night when I was walking through the second floor checking doors and wasting time, I saw a man walking around the big office space that was shaped like a diamond with a boardroom off of one of the points that looked out over the casino floor. The man was wearing pants and a headdress with red feathers. I can't really describe it, as I don't really know much about them. I saw the man several times in that area. He would show up on the opposite side of the diamond from you, if that makes any sense. He would be walking on the opposite side of the diamond. If you cut across to get close, he would turn and walk away. If you called surveillance, they would say they were getting a lot of orbs on the cameras and couldn't see you well. Once you moved into one of the hallways on either side of the diamond-shaped room, the orbs would go away, and they could see you clearly. The second thing, I don't know if it was a ghost or something else, but I know it happened because it didn't just happen to me. I know at least 3 other people this happened to as well. I was driving around down at the man-made lakes that the tribe had built for fishing. The sun had just gone down, and I was killing time before I went back to eat lunch. I had the windows down and was messing around with my flashlight, shining it into the woods on the other side of the fence. Now I know there were many raccoons, some deer, and even a few mountain lions that lived by the river there. As I was going around the back of the first lake, I saw something that didn't look right, so I stopped and shined my light at this thing I thought was a dead tree. As I came to a stop, so did all of the sounds from the woods and the lake around me. I shined my light at this thing. It was around 9 feet tall and white or gray, I couldn't tell. I shined my light down to where it disappeared into the brush and then back up to its head, and when my light got up to its face, the eyes shined back from the light red, which, in my experience, means whatever is on the other end is a predator. I got a little freaked out, so I started to move forward a bit, and the thing followed me on the other side of the fence. I kept my light on it for a while, and it kept following me. I decided that I didn't need to drive around the second lake, and I would just go back to the facility. As I was eating my lunch that night, a buddy who is from that tribe saw I was out of sorts and came over, asking me if I was okay. I then explained what I saw earlier. He then said, "Are you sure that's what you saw? You aren't messing around?" Very seriously, I told him I was sure that is what I had seen. He then said, "Okay, I need to go speak to someone. Stay here for a while." I then went back to eating my lunch and playing on my phone. A few minutes later, an older native man named Johnny came over and sat down at the table I was eating at. He asked me a few questions and then made a call on his cell phone. I was then called over the radio to go back to the security office. When I went in, my supervisor was talking on the phone. Once he hung up his phone, he told me to go get into the security unit and relieve the guy down at the lakes in the security shack and that I would be down there the rest of the night. When I went to get into the unit, my buddy was also in the unit waiting for me. When we got to the shack, he went in and put up some basic curtains and blocked off the entrance to the lakes. As I was getting myself situated, he said to stay in the shack for the rest of the night and to keep the doors closed. No one would be down until 11, when I was to be relieved. I might hear some cars come in, but again, stay inside and keep the doors locked. Whoever was coming to relieve me would call and tell me when they were on the way. I did as I was told, but there was something wrong with that post. That night I heard knocking on the doors, and someone tried to open the door on either side of the shack, but they were both locked. After that I put in my headphones and killed time watching movies or messing around with my phone. That was the longest night I spent at that place. Every few minutes, something would shake the shack, giving me the impression that someone was watching me. It climbed on top of me. Obligatory, I'm a skeptic, but I've had a couple of instances in my life that I can't explain. This one was more unnerving than all the others. When I was a little kid, I suffered from chronic insomnia. After bedtime, I would lie awake for hours. My mom was aware of my insomnia and would check on me every night before going to bed to ensure I was asleep. If she found me still awake, I would get in trouble. This habit led to me pretending to be asleep every night she peeked into my room, lying perfectly still with my eyes closed and breathing calmly until she left. One night, when I heard her approach my door and open it, I lay perfectly still with my eyes closed as usual. But I heard her start walking into the room. Obviously in my head I'm thinking that she figured out I'm awake, and she's coming in to make sure. Keeping my eyes closed, I hoped she would fall for my usual trick and leave. When I heard her reach the side of my bed, suddenly I felt a huge weight pressing down on my chest. I have no idea how I rationalized this as a child, but in my head I was picturing her leaning down and resting her body weight on me or something. As an adult I realized it would defy physics for her to suddenly drop all her weight on my chest. I thought that she was trying to startle me to see if I was only pretending to be asleep, so I kept lying completely still, admittedly very tense at this point. After what felt like forever but was probably less than 10 seconds, the weight lifted, and I heard her walk out of the room and shut the door. I was relieved that she hadn't caught me still being awake. Fast forward 20 years, and we're just hanging out and chatting about some stuff in my childhood, and I suddenly remember it. I laughed and remarked on how peculiar it was, anticipating that she would respond with a similarly light-hearted comment, perhaps suggesting that she was fairly certain I had been awake, allowing us to share a laugh now that I was older. But she just looks at me completely bewildered and says she never came into my room, she would only ever look through the door before closing it again. She seemed just as weirded out as me. My question is, if that wasn't my mom on my chest, what the hell was it? My first definitive paranormal experience. I just recently discovered this channel and wanted to share. About 5 years ago I had just moved into a new house with my wife at the time and 2 kids, ages 2.5 and 1. My 2.5-year-old was very articulate for his age, and so one day as we were walking out the front door, he pointed across the house and asked, "Mommy, who's that little girl right there?" Well, my wife and I kind of just froze because he was the kind of kid that had never made up any imaginary friends or anything like that. But the moment passed, and we kind of forgot about it. About 6 to 8 months later, I remember I was in my bedroom late at night. I have a large window in my bedroom that looks out into my backyard. I also had a couple strings of lights overhead that illuminated the yard perfectly. One night, while I was studying for a class the next day, I looked outside and saw that one swing on my kid's swing set was moving back and forth in a perfect pendulum motion, as if someone were on it, while the adjacent swing remained completely still. This was not the first time this happened, the third, I think, but it was the instance that I remember the most clearly and took the most notice of. I honestly have no idea why I didn't think to tell my wife or to take a video, but I just stood there in the window and watched it for about 1 to 2 minutes, and it kept up perfectly consistently. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out to my deck to get a better look. Still swinging. I had been studying lots of science classes at that point, so my head was in the space of I'm going to figure out the rational explanation of why this is happening. It was breezy out, so I walked up to the swing set and held my hand in different places around the swinging swing, and there was no breeze, plus the swing next to it was still dead still. Also, my thought was that if it was the wind, there was no way it could keep a perfect back and forth motion. If a swing got even a little off, it would have collided with the one next to it. Anyway, I'm not sure if I had the previous encounter with my son in mind or not, but I had a very certain feeling at that moment that there was a little girl swinging on the swing, almost like I could see her but obviously couldn't. I also felt very at ease and not frightened in the least. Then after about 5 to 10 minutes I stopped the swing just to see what would happen, and it remained stopped. I remember apologizing out loud to the girl for stopping the swing and telling her that she could swing whenever she wanted to, but it never happened again after that, and I haven't had any additional encounters at this house since. I looked up public records and asked the landlord if any little girl had ever died in this house, but received no information. The only info that I could collect is that a few years before we moved in, there was an elderly woman who lived here for, 20 years, but the owner had the landlord kick her out in fear that she would die in the property, so she had to move with family a few states away. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Continuing paranormal experiences after my first ever encounter. Last December, I had my first paranormal experience in my 32 years of life, and since then, I have continued to have more experiences. Today was the latest. As a quick rundown, I'll just tell you my first was a figure in my girlfriend's mom's basement as I was leaving with Christmas gifts. It terrified me to my core. Second, a few months later I was randomly checking footage from my security camera one morning and saw the alert for animal movement. It's almost always rabbits, and it was this time too. But during the video, it sounds like breathing and a voice saying hello. For some reason I chose to watch this video among the dozen or so taken from night to morning, and in this one I hear the breathing and voice. Last night / this morning was the latest. To start, we were out of town and staying at an Airbnb. The first night was fine. Last night was our second. Typical quadplex. Middle of a decent neighborhood, central location. The usual checkout by 11 rule. So our plan is to be up and around by 10, clean up, and leave by 11. Randomly yesterday, before we left in the afternoon, my girlfriend's daughter, 9, was FaceTiming her friend from school and walking her around the Airbnb. In the room we gave her, I can hear her on the phone with her friend saying, "And here is the creepy closet." I ask her why she thinks it's haunted, joking, and she says with a straight face, "Not haunted. Creepy. Write it off. Dinner and beers while we wind down." She goes to bed early, and I and my girlfriend stay up to watch a movie while I polish off some more brews. Bedtime is about 3. As I go to lay down, I'm just restless. Not feeling tired despite a long day of running around, a huge dinner, and 8 to 9 beers. That usual combo puts me out like a light. However, tonight, I'm fully awake. I go to the living room. I just can't stay still. I don't even feel drunk. I try to watch TV. The minutes tick by. I'm so stir crazy I couldn't even sit still. Until around 5:30 a.m., as the sun is coming up. I try to go back into the room with my girlfriend and wake her up on accident. Not tired as soon as I sit in bed and she wakes up. I apologize and leave. Back to the couch. I usually never have insomnia, especially after a night of food and beer. Now is when it gets weird. As I'm back in the living room, I feel tired. Weird but okay. I lay on the couch with my fan and start dozing off about 6 a.m. But right as I feel myself falling asleep, I hear someone walking in the hall between the rooms and bathroom. Maybe my girlfriend. But the bathroom light doesn't come on. And I never hear the door open. I try to go back to sleep, and the same thing happens. As soon as I feel myself dozing off this time, I hear undistinguished talking. Between a woman and child. I think it's weird my GF would be up at 6:15 talking up her kid. I get up, and it's quiet. No one in the hall. I'm creeped out now. I get back to the couch. Restless. I get tired again around 6:45, but this time, as I'm about to sleep and dozing off, I feel someone at the end of the couch. Just that feeling you get when someone walks in the room as you're trying to sleep. I open my eyes, no one there. Now is the fun part. My GF couldn't get back to sleep. She's up at 7:15 and says she's just going to get ready, and we can just check out early. We leave an hour early and decide to skip eating in town and just get coffee and go back. 3-hour drive home. Literally the minute we get all the bags back in, we look out the window and snow starts dumping. We didn't know it was going to snow. No one else must have either because the highways and roads were not treated. If we hadn't left early, we would have been halfway home, stuck in the crap. The roads became instant ice, and it dumped 2 inches of sleety snow in about 3 to 4 hours. Countless wrecks all over the interstate. If I hadn't been so restless and had those creepy experiences, who knows what would have happened. We could have wrecked or at least been stuck low on gas. It's so weird to go my whole life with literally no ghost stories or hauntings to seemingly one every month and a half since my first. Is it common to not be sensitive to the paranormal until an encounter, and then you become a lot more sensitive? I've also noticed I've been more emotional since that first encounter. Sometimes I find myself sad randomly. But unexplainable. It's almost the same feeling as thinking about a recent death. Perhaps that feeling is just a sign that I am approaching a midlife crisis, but another part of me believes that my initial encounter has made me more open. Or maybe the thing I saw is staying with me. But I've started becoming more and more creeped out. When I was 6 years old, just around the time my grandfather had passed away, I was sleeping in my sister's room as mine was being redecorated. My bed was next to the top of the stairs, so I could see anyone come up. One night I get this strange feeling and just cannot seem to sleep. I start playing Pokemon on my Game Boy Color. A few seconds later I hear the bottom step of the stairs creak and quickly shut off the Game Boy, as I believed it to be my mom or stepdad coming up the stairs and didn't want to get in trouble. I lay down facing the door to see who it was and if they were coming in. As the person reached the top step, I saw a black, cowboy-shaped hat appear and come up the stairs. As the figure reached the top step, it was a tall shadow figure with what appeared to be a trench coat, cowboy hat, and popped collar. The atmosphere in the room changes, and I'm almost frozen in place, staring at this figure. I continue to stare, and shortly after, it looks into the room, and its red beaming eyes make contact with mine. It felt like it almost had a snug smile as it walked in the direction of my room being renovated and my parents' room. A few days later in my newly renovated room, I had obtained my granddad's Commodore 64 and was playing around with a relative. I see a black shadow on the white door, shaped like the figure. I check to see if it's my shadow and ask my relative to do the same. The shadow does not move. We turn the lights on in my room and off a couple of times, and it eventually fades. We moved out of that house shortly after my granddad passed, and in my teens I told this story to my mother, who turned pale. To not frighten me when I was younger, she recalled doors slamming behind her upstairs and footsteps running up and down the stairs. This house is where I also encountered seeing my granddad after he passed. He'd often come to the gate of the garden on his way back from work to say hi, and I recall seeing him stand there one final time after he passed and just smile at me. I turned around to shout for my mom and looked back to him being gone. I had constant nightmares in that house and always felt a negative atmosphere. A few months ago I told this story to my so and decided to look up what I saw and was shocked to see what I described had been seen by so many others. My question is, has anyone else had anything similar? Has anyone met the Hat Man? This is my personal story of a paranormal experience I had. My story is considered paranormal because I have no way to explain the events that occurred to me. So for a bit of background, I live in an apartment, and so if anyone or anything came in my house, I would be able to tell because I tend to pick up small noises, and the house is kind of small, so I would know anyway. The incident happened a while back, but I remember it so clearly. So one day I was home alone, and I did my usual routine of checking the house to make sure I was home alone so I could do what I wanted. I put my earphones in, and I was listening to music with my volume really high. Since I was listening to rap music, and the beats are quite aggressive, my hearing was limited to only the music. I decided to do my chores at some point, so I went into the kitchen to do the dishes. Basically my kitchen has this massive window in front of the sink, and I can see what's behind me with the reflection of it. While I was doing the dishes and listening to music, I specifically remember vibing to Berserk by Eminem, a loud and energetic song, while keeping the window in my line of sight just in case. Suddenly, I sensed a presence in my kitchen, and an unexpected tug on my hair. I automatically turned around in shock to see who did that, but nobody was there. My hair wasn't caught on any clothing at all either, so I was a bit shaken up. Regardless, I searched the house, and nobody was home still, so I just continued doing dishes but without music. I decided not to tell anyone about it because I didn't want people to think I was making it up, so I kind of just dismissed it until a week later, when I was in bed, and then suddenly I felt hands on the top of my head trailing down slowly to my eyes. Immediately I sat up and looked around, but I realized there was no point since my bed is in a corner of my room and my pillow is directly in front of a wall. Again, I just kind of dismissed it and thought I was just worn out since it happened at like 2 in the morning. I would have loved to say the story stopped there, but it didn't because it got worse. I was relaxing in my living room on my phone one night when I saw something on TV. For context, my TV is like 72 across and 40 down. My TV can reflect most of our living room when the screen is off, and one of the more noticeable features is the living room door. So I looked up from my phone, and in the door was this white, lanky figure just staring at me through the TV reflection. I just sat there in shock, unsure of what to do because I was totally freaked out. After a couple of seconds I turned to face it, and then it disappeared. Feeling a bit scared, I went into my bedroom and fell asleep. Again, I didn't tell anyone because I just felt like this was all a part of my imagination. After this night, I kept seeing this figure appear in my room for a couple of weeks. It was either at my desk, by my door, or at the foot of my bed, and I had to sleep with a light on. Eventually it went away, and so I thought I'd tell my best friend about it, and we just joked about it. I managed to begin to sleep without a light, and everything was fine until one day I was taking a walk in a forest near my house, and while I was walking, I felt like I was being watched. I completed my usual walking routine while trying to appear unaffected by anything unusual, just in case. I was in my living room again that night, and I saw the figure, but this time I noticed it approaching me slowly and menacingly in my peripheral vision. It had these large, white eyes with dark circles around them and a big, creepy smile with saliva in the corners. As it was approaching me, I saw it reach out to me, but when I turned around to look at it, it disappeared. Since then, I have only seen it in glimpses, either when I close my eyes or when it is far away. My time when I encountered an entity face to face. I don't believe in ghosts, not in a very obsessed way like I've seen people do. Though this story is a bit of a wild ride and could probably just be a mistake on my part, it's also such a weird event in my life that I've never really been able to move on from it. At those get-togethers with my friends, I bring this topic up, and they always enjoy hearing about it. I was probably in 6th grade when it happened. During the art period, the teacher guided the students to the upstairs room. To clarify, 1st 5th grades were located on the upper floor along with the art room, while 6th 10th grades were situated on the bottom floor. Anyways, while we all were led upstairs by the teacher, I realized I left my pencil box back in class, which is very strange because I usually take everything with me, but I also forget shit sometimes, so I shrugged it off, and I went to get it back. I entered the empty classroom, walked over to my desk, and began checking in my bag for my pencil box when, out of literally nowhere, I heard the faintest "excuse me" in a very low voice. It was a very young girl standing at the door of my classroom wearing our school's uniform with brief hair, you know, those terrible up to ear-like short? And I can't really remember her face anymore because this is like a 7-year-old memory of mine, but she was very adorable. I'll leave it at that. I asked her if everything was alright, and then she asked if I happened to have any crayons on me. Now, here's a fun fact about me. I usually don't carry my crayons with me because they are quite expensive where I live, but surprisingly, I had them with me that day. I could have said no and moved on, but for some reason I said yes, and I pulled the pack out to give it to her. She walked up to me, took them, and said, "Thank you." Like any sane person, I asked her what her name and class were so that I could retrieve the crayons later. She appeared genuinely confused for a moment before muttering something to herself. I asked again, and this time she responded with Amber from class 2C. After that I let her go and went back to my art class, only to realize that I left my pencil box back in class, so yay to that. My class came to an end, and I went to the class of 2C and looked for the kid from the open window that allowed a clear view. I was unable to locate her. Then the teacher noticed me and asked if I needed something. I told her the story and the name of the child, and she seemed confused. She looked around the class with the description of the child I provided her before looking back at me and saying I got the wrong class. I understood her confusion when I mentioned that the girl had instructed me to meet her in this particular class. The teacher was nice and even called out the name Amber out loud, and still the girl wasn't there. Odd, but I thought she was a young girl who didn't know her class properly, big deal, and went to find her in other classes. I checked the first grade classes, second grade, and even third grade. Before I knew, I searched the whole of the first floor, even though she couldn't have been from 4th or 5th grade given her height and speaking manner, but still, you never knew. Again, I let it go because the school had so many kids it was hard to keep track of and just decided to try again the next day. The next day rolls around, and there is no trace of her. At this point I'm not even panicking about the girl not existing. That girl had my expensive crayons, I just wanted them back. 3 days of trying, nowhere to be found. She just straight up didn't exist because I had gone to the ducking principal and pulled up attendance records with her to find her, not a single person matched Amber. Long story short, my crayons were stolen by some entity. I'm not even scared about meeting someone who straight up just didn't exist. That girl had my crayons. I loved those crayons because they were twice as expensive, and I had to plead for them. So if the soul or whatever entity I met, may I please have my crayons back, please, they cost a fortune. Now some questions you might have. Did I tell my parents about it? No, because I was scared of getting scolded for losing the crayons. I did eventually tell them when I was in grade 10, but again, the 6th grade me wasn't risking it at the time. Did you try the school's camera footage? Our school didn't have one. Did she just give you a fake name? Probably, maybe the girl exists, but again, I searched the attendance record with the principal, who was kind enough to do that, shout out to the principal, and they had photos attached to it, and no one matched her face. Again, it could be me being delusional. The I'm crazy, nothing is real kind. I tend to not take things seriously and often turn them into jokes. Maybe the entity wanted to make me the clown for a while. GG entity, if it was even one. I also have a long history of living in a possibly haunted house with a joined family, but that's another story. If there is a ritual to get my crayons back, please do let me know. I still haven't forgotten about my crayons, which I lost 7 years ago. Thanks for listening. The lady who watched over me while I was sleeping as a child and the shadowy figures that scared me after she left. I was between 3 and 5 years old, so it was around 1989 to 1991. My room was located at the far end of the house, away from my parents' bedroom. I'd wake up in the middle of the night on a regular basis, scared. When I'd wake up, I remember seeing this woman standing at the end of my bed. I could partially see through her, but she also emitted a warm glow. It was a warm, loving, welcoming, and peaceful glow. She was always wearing a blue tunic and a white hat. She was always looking down, holding and happily comforting a baby wrapped in a blanket. After a few seconds of having my eyes open, she'd notice that I was awake and would act surprised, like I wasn't supposed to see her, then she'd immediately disappear. I never felt threatened by her at all. I remember the first time I saw her, I didn't know what to think, and I pulled my sheets over my head before she disappeared. She really did give off an aura that was comforting, welcoming, loving, peaceful, and happy. The glow emanating from her made me feel completely safe while I was sleeping. This happened quite a few times, to the point I'd smile when I saw her after waking up, and she'd look back with a smile that was comforting yet, at the same time, also conveyed something like you aren't supposed to actually see me while still intentionally letting me see her for a few seconds before fading away. She felt like a very familiar mother figure, but it wasn't my mom. I was always scared right after she'd disappear, because that safe feeling would disappear as well, and I'd want to run to my parents' bedroom. I could see my parents' room from my room, but I had to walk through the dining and living rooms to get there. There were always these strange shadow figures, dozens of them, walking around in the dining room, kitchen, and living room. I remember being so scared of them, but I never actually drew their attention while I stood there watching them from my bedroom doorway, and they never really noticed me or walked toward me. It seemed they were in a hurry, walking with busy intent but never actually going anywhere. I was always scared of them, even more scared that I'd draw their attention, but I wanted the comfort of my parents. I was too scared to run past the shadow people who were walking around, so I screamed for my parents from the doorway of my bedroom. The instant I'd scream, the shadowy people would stop walking, then all of them would look up at me with an angry and frustrated aura but never actually take a step towards me. They'd just disappear about the time I'd hear either of my parents' voices as my mom or dad walked toward me. One of the last times I saw the lady at the end of my bed and the shadow people, I wanted to get to my parents' room, but instead of just calling out for them, I just closed my eyes and held out my hands to feel my way across the dining room and living room to my parents' bedroom. I actually made it there on my own. Even with my eyes closed, I could feel them there before they started to disappear, but I could also feel as they were fading away that they were angry because I wasn't as scared of them anymore. I stopped seeing them shortly after that, which was also around the time I started feeling more comfortable staying in my bed all night by myself without needing to have my parents close by, but it's one of the most real and vivid memories that I can remember from when I was that age. I am 38 now, and I still remember exactly what the lady looked and felt like and the shadow people. This wasn't even an old house or anything you'd really associate with a stereotypical haunted place. It was actually a relatively new double-wide trailer that my mom and dad had put there a few years before I was born. They bought the trailer brand new directly from the manufacturer. I believe that what I saw and felt must have been real, because a 3 to 5-year-old child would not have been able to imagine the distinct physical sensation from the lady at the end of my bed, whose aura radiated warmth, understanding, comfort, love, and peace as she glowed. It was a distinct physical feeling that a 3 to 5-year-old wouldn't have been able to just randomly imagine. I can still vividly recall that feeling. I never saw anything like that again in that place or any other place I've lived. My first and only convincing paranormal experience. I want to preface this by stating I am usually very skeptical about this subject. I find it interesting, but normally I try to debunk or find logical explanations for things that are not immediately explainable. However, when I recount this story to people, I still find myself perplexed and even a bit emotional when telling it. A few years ago, my then girlfriend and I were visiting a friend of hers. It was a nice 3-story townhouse that had recently been built, 10 years old at the most. There were about 6 of us in the group. It was a tradition for all of us to meet every once in a while, have food, play games, etc. It had gotten late, and we all had planned to stay the night there. We assigned each couple their own space/room, provided us with blankets and pillows, and informed us that our designated space was the basement. I am normally a night owl, so it takes me a bit to fall asleep compared to my girlfriend, who can shut down fairly quickly. The basement was completely finished and fully furnished. Mostly with workout equipment, a large flat-screen TV on the wall, and a small bathroom, but no bed. So we made a makeshift bed on the floor, in the middle of the room. I remember it being around 2 a.m. when it suddenly became freezing. I should add here that my girlfriend and I also brought with us a heated blanket, since we knew it could get pretty cold, but this was a different type of cold, and that blanket did not help despite me cranking it up to the highest level. I also knew what the AC sounded like when it ran, and it did not cut on or run at all the whole night. This was during the summer. Not long after, I remember feeling this presence suddenly come over me. I can only describe it as the sensation you feel when another person comes into close proximity to you, but this presence was felt above me since I was lying on my back. So imagine feeling the presence of something hovering over you while lying on your back. The hairs on my neck began to raise, and my ears perked, as everything felt wrong about my surroundings. Also, all the sound was completely sucked out of the room, every abstract and benign sound, like you were in a soundproof room, or when you walk outside after snowfall. I remember shifting to look over at my girlfriend to check on her and to see if she was awake, but she was lying on her side facing away from me, appearing to be asleep. The weirdest part was nothing visually seemed out of the ordinary. It was very dark, but I couldn't visually see anything that would explain all my other senses/instincts heightening. I don't remember even falling asleep that night. The next morning, I did not mention anything about the night before to anyone, including my girlfriend. We all enjoyed breakfast together and went our separate ways. My girlfriend and I lived together, so we went back to our apartment. A couple of days later, my girlfriend and I were having dinner and telling funny stories about the get-together when she suddenly got this serious look on her face and asked me, "Hey, that night, did you feel like something was down there with us? Like watching us?" I was shocked. Initially, I believed I was overly paranoid because I was sleeping in a strange place, but the realization that she had also experienced the same thing without me bringing it up frightened me. I then told her about what I felt and asked if maybe her friend came down in the middle of the night to check on us or any other logical explanation for it. We agreed that my girlfriend would ask her friend about it next time she saw her. When her friend told my girlfriend she did not come down that night, my girlfriend began to explain what happened. I was not present for that conversation, but my girlfriend told me when she started her sentence with, "Friend name, do you remember that night we all got together and spent the night in your basement? Well, there's something I want to tell you." After that sentence, the friend reacted oddly and began to freak out, which was off-putting to my girlfriend. To ease her friend's nerves, my girlfriend lied and turned the situation into something humorous. I can't remember what she said exactly, but she did not end up telling her friend about that night at all. My girlfriend and I ended up breaking up a year or so later, and I do not speak with any of her friends anymore. I distinctly remember the dynamics of her and my relationship, as well as her friend group's relationship, changing after that night. Weird time. Some of my paranormal encounters. Hello everyone, I want to share some of my paranormal experiences from grade school to my first year of college. I used to be plenty suspicious, but not as much nowadays, but with my family's Filipino American and Catholic roots, old stories of the unknown still run through some of the tales my mom, who grew up in the Philippines, told my sister and me as kids. I do believe the unknown is still out there on a daily basis, and this set of stories just adds to that testimonial. The earliest paranormal experience I remember having happened once in first grade, and therefore, about 10 or more years ago, so I don't remember much. All I remember is that one time, I was peering over the corner of my bed to see a hand that wasn't mine hold onto the edge of the bed very briefly. The hand had really smooth and fair skin, so hats off to its attention to skin care. Also, it was around this time when my classmates all decided to share ghost stories on a field trip, and one that really freaked me out was that my classmate Alicia told a story where a glowing green man just walked into her room one night. There was also a time when I played an opera by Mozart against my mom's wishes. She thought it was a bunch of people chanting or something and didn't like it, and something heavy tumbled by itself to the floor. We couldn't find the heavy object at all, so we don't know who did it. The next few encounters took place in 3rd and 4th grade. It was late, around 10 p.m., and time for my sisters and my bedtime because we had school the next day. When I stepped out of the bathroom brushing my teeth, all my family heard strange, warbling, whistling ascending and descending the staircase outside our door. My mom and dad asked if I was whistling, and I wasn't at the time. The only other person in the house was my aunt, but she was fully asleep by that time. We never dared to open the door during this incident to see what it was, nor did we the second time it happened. A few mornings in the early dawn of 7 a.m., 8th grade me would sometimes wake up to the sounds of a joyful choir singing a church song, complete with harmonies, etc. It was a wonderful sound coming from inside the house. I remember just lying there and listening to whatever was singing. Could never find the source. Nothing really strange happened during 6th to 8th grade that I could remember, just periodic feelings of being watched or dread or calmness out of nowhere, if those count. During the summer of 2017, my family went on a trip to Canada, and we passed through Montana. In the cliffside somewhere there, I saw a strange flat building thing. Apparently I was the only one who saw it, and I forgot most of it, just thought it was strange that out of everyone who was looking out the window, no one else saw it. There was a staircase in my high school that was haunted. It always appeared dark in there. I don't know why. Every time I had to use it, the lights remained undimmed, creating an eerie atmosphere. Apparently in the early 2000s a janitor even encountered the ghost, and the security tape recording of the incident could be seen on request at the main office. One of my grandmas had unfortunately gone to the hospital for declining health. She is currently doing really well as of writing this, and in the hospital garage, we were all a bit worried, but all of a sudden we felt calm. A skinny, all-white cat crossed our paths in that garage, never to be seen again afterwards, though. We like to believe it was a visit from an angel. My family had cared for an injured bird several years ago, and it had become best friends with the dog. Unfortunately, our dog either forgot about the bird being there and accidentally made it pass away with her paw claws or something, so sadly we had to bury the bird hours later. While my mom was preparing the grave, she felt a weight land atop her head multiple times, removing itself each time she waved her hand to shoo whatever it was. It wasn't a bug because no bug was that heavy, and my mom says it may have been the spirit of the bird saying its farewells. When I drove to a Walmart for the first time, I accidentally drove into the lane where police were stopped. I knew this was really bad and it could interfere with them, so I wanted to merge back to the other lane. No cars would let me through, except for this lady driving a white minivan. She smiled and signaled for me to get in front of her, and I did while thanking her with a wave. But when I turned again to see her car, which would be right behind me, no white minivan was in sight. Thank you to the angel in the road that day. At my previous college, I was dozing off in my Gen Bio 2 class, and then in the room across from me, which was usually pitch dark, I saw a little kid in the window. He looked at me and smiled, then suddenly put his hands on the glass and disappeared. I didn't see him ever again, and it was probably the strangest thing I saw at the previous college, other than running into the school mascot headless in the staircase once. I had an episode of sleep paralysis where something was in my room, and it had a voice that sounded like a rapid swirling wind. It kept whispering in my ear while I lay there motionless and scared out of my mind. I know the brain imagines things during sleep paralysis, but no way in heck was I going to open my eyes to the thing before me. It felt so real. After nearly passing out with fear and reciting the Our Father and other prayers to ask Jesus and God to protect me in my sleep, as well as stating to whatever the thing was that Jesus was the most powerful one in the house/room and God will always triumph over darkness, and that I claim Jesus over fear, the sleep paralysis episode ended. These two are the most recent strange happenings, taking place from summer to October 2022. I was driving back from the university on the highway and noticed a stopped red car with one working front light pulled over. I didn't think much of it and continued on. Then after about 10 minutes of driving past where that car was stopped, I couldn't believe my eyes that I saw it again. Same singular working light, same paint job on the side of the road in front of me. For it to have passed me like that, it had to be going faster than 120 miles per hour, but I don't recall it ever passing me since when I tried to look at it in my rear view, it vanished. Just last night, October 29, 2022, I was woken up suddenly by something making a loud, whistling like ooh sound outside. I was so freaked out. Thank you so much for listening to all of these. What was the scariest potentially paranormal thing you've experienced? When I was pregnant with my son, I was homeless and stuck with an abusive guy. We went to stay with his cousin, who was actively smoking crack and would have violent outbursts. The family was incredibly abusive as well and would make me do dishes, take out the dogs, and mop the floors while not being allowed to shower. They took the handle off, or eat dinner with them. We would sit in the other room. I felt mentally exhausted and trapped. The house was so dark, and the wife would tell stories about how her young child was afraid to be alone upstairs because of the shadows following him, and she was pushed down the stairs once. I always felt someone over my shoulder and would see people out of the corner of my eye. Like actual people, it seemed. Sometimes I would try to catch a glimpse only to see a family member standing there. So I knew I wasn't crazy. Everyone in the house spoke about small black shadows with legs that would run quickly across the floor. I should add this house and area were about 100 years old. The guy who had a room upstairs, another cousin, would talk about how the curtains would sway as though someone was touching them with no wind. One night I went through the front entrance. I hated it, it was dark, and I had to walk down the walkway with bushes on either side. At night it freaked me out, but the car was so close, and my pregnant ass was craving mandarins, which were in the back seat. I walked quickly to the car, and on the way back, in the dark of the bushes, was a deep growl. My first thought was, OMG, I forgot to bring one of the dogs in. I hurried in and accounted for all 3 dogs. The icing on the cake for that straight hellhole was when I and my ex were talking, facing one another on opposite couches. In the middle of us, we hear, shh, and we both freeze. Did you hear that? Was that you? No, was that you? We both kind of shrugged like figures and went back to talking. I hated that house. It radiated sadness and anger. Do you believe in ghosts? I didn't, not until I started law enforcement 15 years ago. It didn't take long before I had my first paranormal encounter on a call. Over the years, I've experienced quite a few strange occurrences, enough to inspire me to create a channel called Policing the Shadows, where I share these stories along with those from fellow officers. There was one call I went to, a death notification, that really freaked me out. I had to contact some family members of the deceased woman who was involved in a fatal car accident a few miles away from her home. When I arrived, I met a woman near the roadway just inside the property gate. She said she heard me coming from miles away. I asked her if she lived at the residence, which she confirmed she did. After asking her to speak with me at the house, she agreed but said she needed the walk as the house was about 75 yards from the road. After making it to the house, I approached the front door on a small wooden porch and began scanning the driveway for the woman. It was about 1 a.m. and completely dark. While looking for the woman, the front door opened and a younger woman appeared. She was concerned about my presence and asked if everything was okay. I asked if I could speak with her and any other adults inside, and she welcomed me in. I told her I would wait for the woman I met near the gate, and she told me nobody else should be home. I then freaked out and began searching the property, nothing. After entering the residence, I told her and her husband the news about Susan, who ended up being her mother. She said her mother moved in a few months back after her father had passed and wasn't handling it well. While she and her husband were comforting one another, I began looking at photos on the wall. There was a picture of a middle-aged woman that stood out to me. She was a younger version of the woman I spoke with near the gate. While looking at the picture, the daughter confirmed that was her mother, the woman that passed in the wreck. I spoke with the ghost of the individual that died in the crash just before telling her family what happened. It's interesting to note that a lot of people are hesitant to discuss their experiences. They often fear being seen as weird or dismissed. So, I want to hear from you. What experience made you a believer? I think there is a mimic in my house, but it's mimicking me. I have experienced paranormal things since I was a child. I have always been open and receptive to paranormal things, possibly to a fault. When I started dating my husband, who is now my spouse, I shared many stories about the paranormal experiences I had during my childhood and teenage years. He has always been fascinated by the paranormal, and my stories always intrigued him, but he never experienced anything himself until we moved in together. I've always believed in the existence of a clinger spirit that has attached itself to me at some point in my life and has remained by my side. We've lived in different locations and always experienced the same things at each home. It was never anything malicious, and I always joked that my Casper was just doing things to say hi and let me know he's there. My husband just laughed it off because there was never a real issue, and everything seemed harmless and playful. We have walked into our offices with our desk chairs spinning when no one was in the room. We have smart TVs, and they all rotate, turning on in the middle of the night as if someone is trying to watch TV, scrolling through the apps to select Netflix or Hulu. I have also observed the TV cycling through the different HDMI options. Items that have specific locations, like keys, will end up in random places like under the kitchen sink or in a sock drawer. We shut our closet doors at night, and we will wake up with them wide open. I can't sleep if there is even a sliver of light showing in my room, and any light will wake me from a dead sleep. I wake up to the bathroom light switching on quite often, which requires me to get out of bed and turn it off so I can go back to sleep. My husband's computer powers on by itself, and it's a big tower with a power button that takes a little effort to push. We've become used to those things, but lately something else has started, and I think it's mimicking me. Lately, when I'm downstairs and my husband is in his office upstairs, he will walk to the landing of our stairwell and ask me if I called his name. Usually if I need something or have a question for him, I will just call his cell if I'm too lazy to run upstairs or if I'm in the middle of cooking and can't leave the stove. Even when I'm lying down in bed and he's on his computer in the same room, he will pull off his headphones and ask me what I need. For a while I was thinking, am I losing my mind? Am I actually saying something and not realizing it? He has stopped gaming midstream to come find me, aggravated that I am calling him, when I literally haven't said a word. Every time I tell him that I didn't say his name, he gets this confused look, like he is trying to read my face to see if I'm telling him the truth. The pivotal moment occurred yesterday. I was lying in bed reading, and he threw a bottle of water on the bed next to me. I asked him why he brought me a bottle of water, and he said, "Do you not remember asking me for water?" I told him no and pointed to a bottle of water on the nightstand that I brought to bed when I lay down. He said, "You literally just yelled down for me to bring you a cold bottle of water." I explained to him that I did not say that because I had my own cold water that I brought to bed. We both agreed that something strange is happening, as this has just started in the last month, and I don't know if this is my entity that has just become vocal or something new. We're both of sound mind, and neither of us has any sort of mental issue, that we're aware of, that would have me speaking without knowing it or am hearing things. Aside from extreme annoyance, is there a real cause for concern? My life-changing paranormal story. Okay, this one actually changed my life. I will attempt to keep this story simple, but I will include some details that make my experience more transparent. From 2014 until 2023, I had a huge mental health issue, which I've now recovered from very well. The mental health issue was officially diagnosed as drug-induced psychosis, as I'd been tricked at 18 years old to take part in smoking what's now referred to as spice or K2. Despite experiencing some unresolved issues during my early childhood years, being tricked marked a significant turning point in my life. I believe that the details of my experiences may help readers form a better judgment about this story. So I'll tell you now what those daily/minutely psychotic experiences were. I believe that people could read my thoughts or that the thoughts I had throughout each day were somehow being discussed in front of me, as if I were part of a third-person narrative. It was a horrible place to be stuck for 9 years, but a revelation came when things got so bad over the following years of my taking party drugs as a coping strategy that I eventually lost the respect of my friends and family. I returned to my mother's house, but unfortunately, my relationship with her has never been harmonious. Consequently, I was forced to make the difficult choice to become homeless. I'd already been planning for it for a few weeks, so I was well prepared by this point. My first idea was to head to the town center to look for a local homeless shelter, a charity-run building, or some advice on where to camp out away from any human danger, such as other homeless people who might try to steal the belongings I was carrying in a small bike trailer I'd purchased as part of my homelessness situation. One staff member recommended a local public nature reserve that had some woodland and excellent coverage, offering views of the town from higher ground. The first 2 nights camping out up in these woodlands were fine for me and gave me more time to actually heal away from the stress of what I'd been going through over the years, strangely enough. Then, on the 3rd night, something slightly strange happened up in those woods. It was nearly dark in these forested hills as I listened to music through my headphones, feeling quite confident. No one else would be up there near me when I started hearing what seemed just plain absurd and funny to me at the time. It resembled a high-pitched warbling sound that fluctuated in volume. My initial thought was that it sounded exactly like the kind of sound you'd hear a spaceship making in a very old Hollywood-style film or something, so to me at the time, it was comical and humored me. I then went to sleep, and the next morning everything was fine, but this is where it gets really weird. On my 4th night of being in those woods, I got there early after walking around for some time and grabbing some food from the charity shop in the town center. I did the usual tent setup in a much deeper part of the woods. I also want to point out that I did mention I had taken a large amount of party drugs over the years, but at this point I was actually over 9 months clean of anything and was trying to make a better life for myself. Hence my decision to go homeless in hopes I'd be buying myself time to find my place. I decided to chill in the tent, which was actually boiling inside considering it was summertime, so my energy was quite depleted. Eventually, I fell asleep early, and by the time I woke up, it was already pitch black. Approximately 11 p.m. I just remained lying down for a bit, quietly listening to the wind, until I started hearing branches snapping around the tent in various places. Now, usually and understandably, people would freak out, which I got, but at first I didn't. Mainly because I was rationalizing it all because I truly believed there was nothing and no one out there, maybe a small wild animal, but nothing to freak out about. And considering the largest wild animal that would be spotted up there is deer, I felt quite calm. But then the strangest thing occurred, which to this day I cannot explain. While I was hearing these snapping branches and thinking it's nothing, of course, and trying to focus on what I'll be doing in the morning, these sounds from outside the tent seemed to be getting more frequent and slightly louder at points, so of course this piqued my interest, and in that moment when I became aware, the noise instantly stopped, no wind, no snapping branches, no nothing, and I thought, oh great, the wind stopped and the weird noises, obviously it must have been in my head then, and tried to carry on thinking about tomorrow's plans, and just as I was trying to think, the wind and weird crunchy snapping noises carried on. So in my head I was now thinking, okay, it's a bit weird, but wind comes and goes. At this point I started freaking the F out because I thought I heard a voice not far away. This is when I decided to grab my folding tree saw for safety while I kept hearing something I couldn't quite fully say was someone making noises. At the time, the sounds I heard seemed like muffled or murmured voices in the slight distance, but I wasn't 100% sure. And because I wasn't 100% sure, it kind of helped me in trying to rationalize that maybe I'm just hearing things, but then I started to think back to how the first 3 days were absolutely fine with no hiccups apart from the strange Hollywood-style alien spaceship noise I heard the day before. I want to add that in these situations, your thoughts really do start to pick up pace, but for me especially, it felt like every time I was rationalizing this creepy experience, whatever was happening was intensifying each time as if trying to remind me that trying to be rational in a place like this wasn't going to work. Which set me off in a very heightened state and at one point, I grabbed my torch and braved the idea of shining it outside while sitting inside. The even more freaky part is that there wasn't anything there, and worse, those sounds had calmed down, and there were no snapping branches or muffled voices in the near distance or ominous winds, yet as soon as I zipped the tent door again, everything started happening, almost as though I was being tormented deliberately for someone's amusement. At this point I shouted out, saying, "I have a knife, so if you come near, you've been warned," and then I hit the metal part loudly to prove I wasn't lying and then rang the police, which got even more strange for me because as I was talking to the emergency services lady, her signal kept cutting out at random intervals. To me this was understandable to a degree given my location, but what really got me was those sounds were back, and the questions she was then asking were just plain silly. I can recall at one point in the call repeating the exact location at least 4 times, as well as repeating other questions that could be heard perfectly clearly. At least on my end, I thought. And from the way she was answering, it seemed a lot like she could definitely hear me too. Things now weren't calming down, and my questions weren't being answered properly, plus I didn't feel like they were taking any of it seriously, so I started screaming down the phone at her, saying, "Stop making me repeat questions you obviously know the answer to already. I'm in a very volatile situation, and I don't take drugs. I'm just homeless, trying to survive, and need the police's assistance immediately." And then she would ask even more stupid questions like, "What's the emergency?" Even though I literally told them as soon as the call started. Throughout the whole ordeal, I just felt as though whatever was out there with me was trying to get this reaction from me, and it's a strange thing because it was definitely a huge key point in my life, as the police did eventually find me after an hour and a half, but they had to confiscate the tree saw, which left me with things being much harder than if I'd stayed there. They gave me 2 options that night, either stay there or go to a hospital in the next town where I'd be under a safe roof. And at first I wasn't a fan of going, considering how weird the emergency services woman was being on the phone, but on the other hand, I knew I had no choice. Another thing that bugged me about the police that night is that they told me I could only take what I could carry to the hospital, but I couldn't take the other stuff I had with me, like the trailer. Most of what I had was also camping equipment, but there are 2 funny silver linings to all of this, which are if I had stayed there in the woods, I'm still unsure to this day if I would have survived the night. And 2. Since making that decision to go to the hospital and sacrifice the trailer and camping gear, I eventually did manage to bide enough time with a solid shelter in place long enough to get my apartment, where I now reside in a town located between the town where those woods are and the hospital I was taken to. So yeah, that's my story of how a very strange paranormal experience actually pushed me toward getting back on track, although it would have been nice to not have the crap scared out of me. I'm very thankful I got out of that haunting experience alive, but I still wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed there. My paranormal experience. This happened back in high school/middle school, so around 2010 to 2012. I'm not positive on what grade, but it doesn't really matter. A little backstory that I learned many years later is that when my dad died in the early 2000s from lead poisoning, as we joke about but really self-inflicted gunshot, there was a friend of the family that practiced warlock/witchcraft stuff and did a protective chant over our household. Could be related, could not. I feel it's relative enough to add to the story. So we lived in a 4-bed, 2-bath double-wide mobile home, just my mom, the oldest boy, my sister, and me, the youngest best boy. From the front door, you could go straight through the back half of the living room, turn left in the dining room, straight into the kitchen to a back hallway with the washer/dryer, turn left in the master bath, straight into the master bed, and once in the master bed, turn left and be back in the living room to repeat endlessly. It was a delightful little circle for us to run around in as children. When in the dinner room, if you turned right, there would be a hallway, and the first left would be a bathroom, the second left was my room, straight was my brother's, and right was my sister's. At night my mom would close her door going to the living room but normally leave the one from her bedroom to the master bath and from the bath to the hallway open. We had a fridge in the back hallway that we kept waters in, and sleepy mom didn't want to deal with doors. Well, as kids normally do, I was staying up late, probably on our family desktop in the dining room or maybe playing Xbox, who knows? It doesn't matter. It's late midnight to early AM for sure, and I decided to get a water from the back hallway. Well, my mom is a creature of habit if anything. She has her spontaneous moments, but her morning and bedtime routines have always been the same. Shower, read, bathroom, turn off her lights, face down her blue LED lighted alarm clock and go to sleep, wake up, fold up alarm clock, brush teeth, coffee, read in bed, get ready for the day. Every day is the same, I've never seen it change. Until today. Once I got to the door for the master bath in the hallway, I probably had 3 or 4 steps to the back door and fridge to the right of that, but something caught my eye. Something I knew was off. Wrong in this routine. Her LED alarm was facing up. Her room had that faint glow of blue LED that just pierced me eyes in the hallway, not a ton of light but enough to see shapes and such. So I thought it odd and went to investigate. My mom, being a very light sleeper, normally would hear someone just walk into her room, so I tiptoed into the bathroom, between the tub and vanity, to the master bed door and stood in the doorway. Just curiously investigating. When I saw it, a figure. At the right side of my mom's queen-size bed. Her side she slept on, with the light glow of the clock. I could see it standing there. But not right. Its legs were straight. Its hips were slightly taller than my mom's, and it lay on the bed. And the thing was a perfect 90 degrees directly over my mom. I went to speak but stopped. I might have made a noise, I don't know. All my hair was standing up. Then it stood up. In a snap it was straight vertical. Like it took a floating back step, pasted in front of the clock blocking out the light, and into the shadow of the wall on the right. I was too scared to look, hoping I imagined it. Oh. How I was wrong. The blue LEDs went dark, and although it felt like a long time to me, the clock showed that no time had passed, for I never took my eyes off them. He was in front of me. At the time I was a runner. 6 feet 4 inches tall and about 165 pounds. Not a thick man, but a tall one at the least. And this thing was every bit looking me eye to eye. It was like a shadow. But you shouldn't see through it, but at the same time you could. I was cold. I was scared. This thing filled the doorway in front of me, literally nose to nose with me. And I did the only thing I could. The only logical thing my terrified mind could think of in the situation of me, my mother, and some entity. In my mind I wished my mother the best of luck. I turned on my heels. I ditched the water idea, gave up on whatever game or device I might have stayed up way too late on, and I went to my room, closed the door, and hid under the covers because everyone knows monsters can't get you there, and went to sleep. Over the years I have been asked by my mom about this incident, and it's always been the same retelling. The fear and cold of just her bedroom and bathroom, the figure watching her and coming to me. This was all caused by her upturned LED alarm clock, which was never again left upturned, I might add. I never saw it again, I never wanted to see it again. I've done some digging over the years and come up with nothing on the subject. He did not have a hat or glowing eyes. No facial features or any features for that matter. It was like a shadow of my exact size that once in front of me filled the whole doorway but didn't. Like a person of darkness but clear. The best way I can describe it is when looking right at a spot, it was just darkness, but around that spot in your peripheral vision, you could see what was behind him. I have not a clue what it could have been. If this was just a random thing. Maybe something from my dad. He was the same height as me and my weight at that age, not when he died. Was it something today with the warlock/witchcraft? I have honestly no idea. I'm 28 now. Every so often this thought comes back to me, and I can still feel that same fear. My morbid curiosity would love to figure out more about what this could have been, but alas, I've come up short. Maybe someone out there has some knowledge of what I speak. Or maybe a similar experience. Either way, thanks for listening. This narrative does not originate from me, but rather from my mother. This was when she was still living in the Philippines, before I was born, around 40-odd years ago. She had gone home after a funeral with her cousin and 2 brothers, just to have a bath and change clothes because of the heat. She said that when she walked into the house, it suddenly got extremely cold, and literally the entire group she was with felt it in an instant. It was basically like if somebody cranked the AC and then supercharged it to turn the whole house into a freezer, which was bizarre because, well, they just didn't have AC at the time. They're like, whatever, maybe it's just us imagining things, when they suddenly hear running around upstairs, which was odd because everyone else was still at the funeral parlor. The group turned to follow the sound as it passed over their heads and over to the staircase, thinking that somebody was going to come down. Instead, they see an empty plastic bag gently float down to the first step at the landing. Except instead of hearing the nothing expected from a plastic bag, every time the plastic bag hit a step on the staircase, it made a thunk sound, like somebody with big-ass work boots was stomping down the steps. Before the bag made it to the ground, the entire group ran away screaming. Duck that. Another story was when I went on a ghost hunt with some friends at the local aviation museum. I wasn't expecting anything. The building is pretty much brand new, and there's nothing particularly special about the area surrounding it. Other than the fact that the exhibits had largely been donated by people who spent their entire lives on these planes, there was nothing that would make you think, yup, this building is definitely haunted. Except things kept happening throughout the tour that just confused the crap out of me because I had zero explanation for it. Fairly early into the night, I kept seeing people running around on the balcony and ducking behind objects and walls, like they were trying to hide but still watch whatever was going on downstairs. At one point, I even tried to call out to the persons upstairs because it looked like kids playing. It got to the point that a guide asked me who I was talking to because we were the only people in the building, and there shouldn't have been anyone else there at all. Duck it, whatever, maybe I'm imagining things because of the echoes and talking from all the other people in the room spooking me out or something. We go into a small, isolated spot with an airframe that was pulled from a lake about 80 years after crashing and decide to try out the Estes method. Of course I'm the one to go under. The feeling of wearing those headphones was just so deeply uncomfortable, and it felt like I was there for ages. It genuinely felt like somebody had dunked me into a tank with ice water up to my ears for hours and hours. My hands were shaking so much by the end. And this building was fairly warm. It was midwinter in the Canadian prairies, and I usually run very warm, enough that I'm sweating in -20 weather while everyone else is bundled up to their eyelids. The heater was cranked high, so even my friend, who runs cold all the time, was struggling with the heat. I'm just sitting there, shivering enough that my hands were hurting, saying things whenever I heard them on the spirit box and spooking the duck out of my friends. Finally, I'm let out from headphone duty, and my friend touches my hand for an instant, only to jump back because my hands were ice cold. Like my skin was actually cold enough that other people could feel it off me. But oddly enough, within a minute or two of taking the headphones off and walking away from the area, I'm back to sweating like crazy, as if nothing happened. Doesn't even stop there. We go to another area and figure, hell, we might as well do the Estes method again since we got so much weird shit the first time with me. My friend goes under, I decide to just hang out on the outside and be annoying. It was ridiculous because it genuinely felt a bit like I was being targeted. She would say something like I'm going to touch you. And I'd suddenly feel somebody grab my sleeve and pull hard. Or even things like slapping on my hands and shoulder, enough that I felt pain. No scratches but at least a couple bruises the next day. Finally, as I'm going to get up and move to another area, somebody yanks on my ponytail hard enough to make me jump. I pulled my hair back, turned to my friend, and asked her, "Are you messing with me? Did you pull my hair?" And she's like, "Why TF would I even do that? That's ridiculous. Are you okay?" Yeah, at this point, I was just done. Duck the Aviation Museum. This happened over a decade ago. I was a college student back then. My finals had just gotten over, and we had to move from the university hostel. I and two of my friends were renting a room close to the university. Since it was summer holidays, my roommates had left for their hometown, and it was just me staying there because I wanted to work a job during the off days and earn some money. The landlord lived on the ground floor, and we lived on the top floor, which was divided into 3 separate rooms. We had taken the largest one. I found a job after a week or so after moving there. I started going, and it had been a few days. Nothing remarkable happened. After a couple of days of joining, I found out that the recruitment company I was working for was actually a con job. They would take donations from poor, uneducated people who desperately wanted to get a job and make them work as salesmen who could only get paid through commissions on the sales they made. Once they found out the con, they would call the company phone continuously, but we were cautioned to not pick up. These types of callers were blocked on the phone by the agency. I felt guilty about the job and was thinking of finding another one. On the 4th day or so, I got a call from such a disgruntled recruit, who had pawned his wife's jewelry to get that job. He had called from a different number, so I picked up, and he just went off on me. He yelled at me and cursed me and my potential generations to come. He was livid, and all I could do was apologize and then disconnect the call. I felt quite shaken. Exhausted, I came back to the room, had a sandwich and milk for dinner while watching Shutter Island. I love watching scary movies, on my laptop. I fell asleep watching the movie and never finished it. All the doors and windows were shut. I had terrible dreams that night. I remember them vividly. I was wearing a black dress and a pearl choker while looking into a mirror in a dark room, and as I watched my reflection in the mirror, my face slowly morphed into a scary, twisted, disfigured mask, while I started to choke myself with the pearl choker I wore. I had never had such a dream before. I woke up from the nightmare, and as soon as I woke, I felt a presence next to me. It was pitch black, so I couldn't see anything, but I clearly felt a presence. I am not a nervous person and have a strong heart. So even though I was startled, I didn't lose my senses. I lay there for a few seconds just to get my thoughts together. It wasn't sleep paralysis. I had had it a couple of times before then, and it didn't feel the same. And then I felt something on my arm. It felt like a fingernail leisurely touching / lightly scraping my left forearm, like a light exploratory touch. My body locked itself for a few seconds from fear. And then, just as suddenly, I gathered my senses and sprang up from my bed. Adrenaline coursing through my body, I quickly switched on all the lights and started screaming for the presence to show itself. I looked at my phone. It was exactly 4:10 in the morning. After I looked around, I finally looked at my arm where it had touched me. There was an 1.5 inch long red mark there, 0.5 centimeter wide. And I lost it. I went to the washroom to treat it. It didn't burn or itch or sting or anything, and it didn't break the skin. It was just a red mark that didn't go away even after soaping. I felt as if I were marked. It felt like a warning of some sort, at least that's how I saw it. I was so scared and flustered, I slept in my neighbor's room that night. I had terrible nightmares that time too. Since there was only one bed there, we both slept in the same bed. And I kept dreaming that the person sleeping next to me morphed into a bald, naked, and demonic figure trying to devour me. I left the room the next morning and went to stay over with a friend and then went home after I booked my tickets. Obviously, quit the job. For many years after that, I had trouble sleeping. I was never scared of the dark before that, not even as a kid. But after that incident, I would sleep with the lights on. If I were alone. Often, I would wake up from my sleep at exactly 4:10 a.m. Maybe that part was psychological. The mark stayed on my arm a few weeks and then faded, just like some old scar mark. Faded completely. I am a pretty skeptical person and quite evidence-driven. But I still couldn't explain what happened that night, no matter how much I tried. I know there was someone there. It felt like a very distinct presence. Like when someone stands right next to you. After many years, now, I don't feel as scared and have taken it in my stride for the most part. But I still think about it often. I am hypervigilant now, though. And I feel like I can sense spaces, I can feel vibes coming off from spaces and people. If it feels like bad vibes, I keep my distance. I do trust my instincts, and they never fail me, tbh. I still cannot sleep without a nightlight, though, and my kitties are pretty fierce about any strange sound in the flat, so I feel a bit protected. I don't try to rationalize it anymore. I used to think that paranormal was just a bunch of bullshit to trap gullible people. Not after that incident, though. 15 years of pain, shadow people, my first paranormal encounter. The story you're about to read is real. I've finally decided to go public with my experiences after nearly 3 decades with just a few close family members and friends knowing. I have some great stories to share for those willing to listen. I'm open to speaking on podcasts and other platforms. This was only my first occurrence with shadow people growing up. I had many more experiences, primarily during my preteen and teenage years. The majority of my paranormal experiences took place within a span of approximately 15 years. My earliest experience began when I was 3 years old or so, and my last profound experience tapered off around 19 years old. The story begins with my first paranormal experience of shadow people. My parents met in the late 80s, and they were both serving members of the military. Shortly after they met, both my parents were assigned to an Air Force base in Ontario. I was born in there, and my brother followed shortly afterwards. Roughly a year after my brother was born, we were transferred to the province of Quebec. My father had posted us to an army base in a highly francophone region of Quebec. My parents decided to buy a house in a neighboring town. It wasn't a luxury home, but I enjoyed my time there as a kid. We had a large backyard, which I spent a lot of time in. The history of the house is unknown to my family. From the looks of it, the house didn't appear haunted. It was simply a typical 1970s-80s middle-class neighborhood house. I suppose this might be one of many visions of what a basic family home would look like in North America. In this house, at 3 years old, everything started. We were what I thought was an average family, but happy and in good health. Nobody had any serious issues, the family dynamic was awesome, and my dad was incredibly creative and fun. For the most part, we were good children. We did well in our early school years, and we weren't too spoiled, especially because we couldn't afford to be. But my mother did everything she could to pamper me and my brother. She wanted a good life for us. She would save her money to ensure we always had new clothes and shoes for school. She also always taught us good manners, to treat all people with respect, and to not judge others. Despite their eventual separation, they remained amazing parents. They always did their best to offer us a good life. When we moved to this town, my mother sacrificed her service to follow my father's. I believe it was a fluke that they were previously posted to the same base, because in the 1980s, career managers were not as accommodating to service couples as they are now in Canada. She decided to use this opportunity to raise her children and look after the home until we were old enough to look after ourselves. Once you entered the front door of the house, there was a small square area for removing your boots and hanging your keys. There were 2 sets of stairs directly in front of you. The stairs led to both the ground floor and the basement. Below, and directly to the left, there was a bathroom, and inside the bathroom on the left side, there was a small storage space. The space was large enough to kneel down and walk into, so my dad used it to develop the film since it was a dark and secluded room. While the restroom was on the left, my room was on the right, which was beside my parents' room. I had a small window in my bedroom on the left side that had a partial view of our large, fenced-in backyard. I couldn't see anything, though, since the window was located high enough on the wall, and I was almost at the basement level, plus, I was just a little guy. I vividly recall many details. My parents purchased my first bed for me when we moved into that house. It was lifted up onto a metal frame and painted bright red, like a maraschino cherry. There was also a railing that my parents later took off when I became older. It was between the ages of 3 and 4, well before kindergarten, that I experienced something so impactful that it would forever be burned into my head until this day. Most nights, we probably went to bed between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. We were familiar with the routine, and we followed it. We had a very military style of discipline in our home. Not only were my parents in the military, but so were the previous generations in my family, and that culture carried on. We weren't perfect kids, but I like to think we were well-behaved kids. One night, which looked identical to all other nights as a child, except for Christmas, I awoke in my cherry red bed. I knew it was late because it was dark outside from my window, but not so late that my parents were asleep, because I could hear them talking upstairs with the TV on. I struggled to fall asleep, so I lay down on my bed, looking around the room like any curious child. I was getting uncomfortable, so I turned over to my left side, which would have been facing the door to my bedroom. It was dark enough in the room, but I was in my room long enough for my eyes to be well adapted to the darkness at this stage. The only light I had from my room was the gentle backside of a faint porch light and any ambient light from the moon, if any. I looked around the room, and then I began to draw my attention to my bedroom door. It had passively piqued my interest because I noticed that the area located directly in front of my closed bedroom door was unusually dark. I remember being able to look at the surrounding walls, but not that specific area for some reason. I kept watching the black mass, and I looked away a few times, still looking around the room. I looked back at the door and, in the confusion, saw an opaque black figure in the outline of a person standing right there. It was probably about 8 feet away or so, give or take. I wasn't initially scared, and instead, I think I kind of giggled, thinking it looked like a person and that some object in my room was obviously creating a very telling shadow of a humanoid. I kept looking into the shadows, but I started to realize that something seemed strange. The shadow itself was not on the wall, it was off the wall, in the room, standing like a person and opaque black in color. No light seemed to come through, it was not transparent, it was not translucent, it was a deep black hole, black. I was still confused, and I didn't put too much thought into it, so I kept gazing. In one moment, I was relaxed and intrigued as to what was causing this image in front of me, but in the next, I was struck with paralyzing fear, as I started to see the figure move towards me. It wasn't walking like a human or something I even recognized on the planet at that moment in my life. There were almost no features. There was no face, but I could clearly discern the shape of the body, arms, legs, and so on. He resembled a man. When the shadow approached me, it didn't do so by walking. There were no fluid, human-like limbs moving around in a human-like or even earth-like fashion. This shadow would vanish, then reappear a step or two closer in a moment, as fast as a shutter can trigger on a camera. I didn't stop looking. I could not shout, I trembled, I cried, and I had my blankets set against my eyes, but I kept watching, as if it was a film. It continued to move itself towards me. Disappearing, reappearing, disappearing, reappearing. Until he stood right over me by my nightstand. I was petrified by that moment. With the speed, I threw the blankets over my head, and I buried my face as deeply into the pillows and blankets as I could without suffocating. It never left. My eyes were closed, but it made no difference. 3 of these shadows were penetrating their way into my mind even though my eyes were sealed shut. These shadows were morphing vividly into horrifying faces, shapes, and grotesque images, all with the purpose of causing overwhelming fear. I could see them in my head, they were clear as day. It was almost like they were telling me, "You can't hide from us." I felt them taking great pleasure in my fear. It was very dark and sinister, and I couldn't get these figures to leave. I felt trapped, like a deer being surrounded by wolves. I could no longer bear it, as I knew I had no place to hide. Somehow, I had the courage to dash out of my room and scream for my parents. I remember running up the stairs to the living room, tripping on the way as I shouted, "Mom, why? Dad, I have a man in my bedroom." I was emotionally distraught, weeping, trembling, and hyperventilating. My mother did what I think most moms would do and tried to reassure their kid that it was just a dream and to go back to sleep. I insisted on the fact that there was a man in my room. My parents took me back to bed, turned on the light, and said a prayer while leaving a holy crucifix underneath my pillow. It is the only case I can recall in this specific town. But it wasn't my last experience. They came back at times later in my life, from the age of 9 to 18, and at a much higher intensity. In 2011, during the London riots, my dad worked as a locksmith for a repossession company, and he had to go to a particular house in the midst of the riots, so he brought a Kosh to defend himself. Well, it got late, and he wasn't answering his phone until he suddenly called my mom and explained that somehow he fell asleep in the kitchen, and he woke up in a puddle of water. He came home and was confused about what happened but didn't think anyone knocked him out because he didn't have any marks, he must have just fallen asleep. That's also when my mom's lungs started to get quite bad. She has been a smoker since she was 8. I remember the 2012 Olympic ceremony. On the same day, my mom told me that she had a dream about an angel who entered her room, waved his wing over her, and healed her. She then chased him, but he was too quick and left. So my brother and I were dropped off at my dad's cousin's party, and my dad took my mom to the hospital to check her lungs, and somehow I ended up in the living room watching the 2012 Olympics alone. The atmosphere felt creepy, especially during the segment around 48-42. And as I was watching this alone, I felt that some sort of spiritual war was brewing. Well, the night ended, and I was picked up by my parents, and she was told that she had the lungs of a 21-year-old, which was amazing, and that she just had an infection. To provide some background on my dad, he is a victim who was hurt by his adult half-brother as a child, and his mother died of cancer when he was 14. But soon after the Olympics, my dad got a call from his cousin Richard, who said that his half-brother was bragging about hurting all his brothers, including my dad. My dad ended up having a breakdown in his van and pissed himself. He told my mom about the phone call, and he decided then and there that he didn't like his job and then became a cab driver. My dad started acting really strange around this time, and one day he walked out and told my mom he wanted to separate, and he wasn't happy. He really started going back and forth from living at home to living elsewhere. I used to come home late from school sometimes because I was attending a club, and the late bus came around 5 p.m., and it took around an hour or two to get home, and at this time, my dad came back, and my parents tried to make it work, so he was already asleep. I was really tired. I remember walking in, eating my dinner, and heading straight upstairs. My dad was already sleeping in his room, and I went into my room and sat on my bed. I remember my body freezing up literally as I sat on my bed. I didn't even have time to take off my school uniform. I was sitting there, frozen, and then my body. And that's when my door started being engulfed by darkness. My eyes were still open, but my body was paralyzed, and I remember trying to move, but I couldn't. And the darkness in my doorway started to form a shape. I saw scales of a dark gray, almost black. It was about 7 feet tall. I could see that its head was just over the frame of the door, and it strangely had a draconic face, almost reptilian. It had no wings and 4 limbs, and I couldn't see if it had a tail or not. I remember how I thought it strangely looked more lizard-like than demon-like, and then it spoke. It said, "I will get your soul," in a deeper version of my dad's voice, and I was terrified and frozen, and my body was rapidly shaking, as if there was a battle for my body. I remember this fight or flight urge came over me, and I remembered a teaching assistant once told my brother that if he saw anything evil, to pray to Jesus. So, all I could do was say in my mind, "No, because Jesus," and in an instant, my body stopped shaking, and I had power over my body again. It was like a flash. My heart pounded frantically, and I was left in a state of shock. So I walked out of my room and was just thinking about how that demon sounded like my dad. That's when he opened his door, half asleep on his bed. He could open the door from his bed, and said, "What are you doing?" And I was creeped out by him and just said, going to talk to Mom." And he went, "All right," and then shut his door. I went downstairs and told my mom what just happened and how this demon had Dad's voice. That's when she told me she kept seeing different faces on my dad, different people, and sometimes animals. I was even more creeped out, and I said to my mom, "You need to leave him," and she told me that she was going to. She just needed time to sort out her money. She told me to pay attention to his mannerisms, and I would see the changes. So that's what I did, and ducking hell, I saw it. He literally transformed in front of me. I didn't see new faces or forms, but his transformation was in his mannerisms. He would quite literally put on voices, and it manifested in the way he walked. Even in how he walked, he would embody these stereotypes. It was bizarre. He also became a horrible person. He was always verbally abusive to me. I think deep down I was in denial of him being demonically possessed because my mom got obsessed with it. She was telling me about Walkins, when the soul dies and another soul takes over a body, and if I'm being honest, regardless of my demon experience, I actually thought she was going mentally insane. Anyway, they finally broke up, and me and my mom were so traumatized that we would just talk for hours about what it was, mostly her being focused on demons and me trying to put it to him just being a bad person. I did see a demon, I did see the mannerisms, and my mom had the demon face encounters with him on multiple occasions. But then one day, when I was about 19, She asked me to come with her to some psychic evening, and I sat there while a psychic we had never met told my mom how an ex of hers/our home was filled with demons, and nobody believes her about it. I then sat there with my mouth wide open as this woman was literally narrating exactly what happened. I think I still battle inside my own head exactly what happened, but I 100% believe in spiritual warfare. I had a paranormal experience. Hi all. I want to share something that happened to me a few years ago in a good old 1970s built house in Perth, Australia. When I moved in, I got a weird vibe from the back bedroom but put it down to terrible decor. After moving in, I began painting that room. While in there, I always had an uneasy feeling. Time goes by, and I don't feel settled in the new house. The kids feel the same way and want to sleep in my room. I can't describe it, but there's this sense of an energy party going on all night, up and down the hallway and into my room. Just weird. Then, one night at about 2 in the morning, the heavy glass ceiling light randomly crashed onto my bed, missing me by about 5 centimeters. A live wire dangles from the ceiling. Then, a few nights later, I go to shut the front security door, and the little cylinder thing that stops the door from slamming falls off and hits me in the face just below the eye, leaving a bruise. That same night I had a pair of barbecue tongs in the kitchen randomly snap open as I walked past. Which is kind of funny now, thinking about it. At this point, I feel very unsettled, but I attribute it to living in a strange new house that requires serious upkeep. The weird energy thing continues, and I've lost a few kilos from feeling sick in the stomach. One morning, daylight, my 8-year-old daughter is in bed with me, and she sits bolt upright. She says, "Mom, I just saw what looked like a long black hoodie jumper floating in the air at the end of your bed." She thought I had somehow hooked up the hoodie to something but could not work out how, as it wasn't against the door, and then she couldn't work out why it disappeared when she looked back to get a second look. I am not one of those people that would normally believe in this kind of thing, but I could 100% sense there was something really wrong in the house. I couldn't ignore the overwhelming sense of dread that pervaded me. I still don't understand WTF that thing was, but I was able to get someone from the local spiritual community to remove it. It felt very real, whatever was going on, even if it was some weird stress-related phenomenon. The guy explained that it wasn't human, like a ghost, but more like a seriously negative entity that was attracted to the home due to something terrible happening in the back room. The funny thing is, my partner, who doesn't live with me and is very much a skeptic of this kind of thing, admitted to me afterwards that when he was painting the back room, the door of that room slammed shut forcefully in front of him. No other doors were open, so it wasn't a wind gust. He then said he had a few weird things happen at his own house after, the TV coming on as he walked past it and vivid nightmares of things that looked like those hooded things in Harry Potter trying to get him. He told me he kept it quiet so I wouldn't completely lose my mind at the time. I'm glad he didn't. My first possible haunting experience in a psychiatric ward. I work as a nurse in a psychiatric unit, which is conveniently tucked away around the back of an old hospital. I'm on night shift at the moment, and most of the night is spent trying to convince manic patients to return to their beds. We were having a strangely quiet night. The staff usually sit in the corridor at the intersection between the male and female sides of the ward. We can hear everything that's going on better from there and intervene quicker if need be. There's a shower room located just to the left of where we sit. It has a toilet and a short wall partition separating the shower in the far corner of the room. As we were sitting there, the door to the shower room slowly crept open. No big deal. We got up, closed it again, and went on with the night. It happened again about an hour later, and again, we thought nothing of it. After closing the door a second time, though, we soon heard the sounds of water running. I got up to check and found the tap in the shower room was running. I thought it must have been faulty, but when I tried to turn it off, it spun easily and stopped running water. Feeling a little freaked out now, I checked around the partition to the shower in case a patient was, somehow, hiding there, but there was no one. When I turned to walk back out, I felt a sudden chill on the back of my neck and heard a sound like gas hissing behind me. I glanced back around and checked the shower, which seemed to work fine, and just assumed there was trapped air or something. The next night we were sitting in the same place, and, again, it was an unusually quiet night until around 2 a.m. when we heard a massive bang and then a dull thud, as if something had hit against a wall and then slid to the floor. The noise seemed to be quite close, and we, hurriedly, looked through each dormitory and individual patient room, expecting that one of the patients had fallen, but everyone was still sound asleep, apart from one patient who told us she had trouble sleeping the last few nights and asked to watch some television in the sitting room. We continued with our search but couldn't seem to find anything to explain the sound and sat back down in the corridor, where we started to talk about ghosts and joke about being haunted. The patient who couldn't sleep asked if she could smoke in the toilet. We occasionally let people do this during the night as we aren't allowed to let them out of the unit after 10 p.m. And trying to tell an avid smoker they can't have a cigarette is a sure way to start a fight that'll cause everyone to be woken up. We said she could have a quick one in the shower room before going back to bed, and she asked for one of us to come in with her. When we asked why, she explained. Because that room freaks me out. There are spirits in there that are trying to come through the mirrors. We heard stuff like this from patients on a regular basis, so we didn't think much of it, offered her some reassurance, and I agreed to come into the bathroom with her. While we were in there, she talked about seeing the ghost of a man in her room, which kept her up at night. She then stopped talking abruptly and looked confused before going over to peer around the partition. I asked her what was wrong, and she shushed me and asked, in a whisper, if I heard what she heard. I admitted I couldn't hear anything. Again, it's a common occurrence for people to talk about auditory hallucinations on our ward, but asked her what she could hear. She said she thought she could hear a dripping sound, but there was no water running, and when she checked behind the partition, she heard a hissing sound. I suggested she finish her cigarette and get back to bed, and she asked for some medication to calm her down and then said, "Man, I hate that bathroom. The door opens and closes itself, you know?" After she went back to bed, I was telling the other staff about this, and we were joking about how much of a freaky coincidence it all was. We were still discussing it when day staff came in. When the first nurse arrived, she came over to ask how the shift was, and we asked her if she believed in ghosts in a jokey way. She said she didn't, but that she had bad memories of the ward that sometimes freaked her out. She told us the worst thing she ever saw was 20 years ago when she was doing the hourly checks on the ward once, just to check on each patient every hour to check they're okay. She couldn't find one patient and went into the shower room because she could hear water running in there. She checked round the partition and found the guy lying dead in a pool of blood in the shower. He'd hacked himself to death with 2 blades, an obviously very unwell man. The nurse told us that ever since that happened, a few times she's gone into the shower room and felt a sudden rush of cold air as if someone was trying to run past her. I might have to start looking for a new job. I'm quite the paranormal skeptic, but here is my story of some truly unexplainable things. I will begin by acknowledging my keen interest in the paranormal, despite my belief that the brain is more susceptible to deception than anything else. But nonetheless, my story is 100% real, and I hope you all enjoy it. So this begins all the way back in sophomore year of high school, roughly 6 years ago. I'm at one of my buddies' parties and end up staying the night. One of our friends brings a Ouija board, and I'm all for it. Like 4 of us, after the party ends, start to use it, but nothing happens. Nobody even took it seriously. Fast forward to the end of the night when I am the only one awake. His family is asleep upstairs, and my 2 buddies are asleep on the couch with the TV in static mode. Figures, right? I am on the phone with my GF at the time. I'm lying on the floor with my feet at the bottom of their stairs. Stairs that go up one way have a little flat part and then go farther up from the direction they came, like a U. So me and the girl are chatting, and I start to hear what sounds like a bowling ball roll down the stairs from right above me. It starts slow, like a thud, then 2 seconds, then a thud. Then it finally hits the flat part. So I'm already sitting up at this point but think somebody dropped something and it's done because there is a wall there, but much to my surprise this bowling ball makes the turn around the stairs and starts its second descent. I start to panic a bit because even my GF asks WTF the noise is. The bowling ball starts to speed up, and it is heading right for me. Right as the thumping gets right near me and the bottom of the stairs. It goes bam, this loud noise as if it ran into several metal baseball bats. 2 seconds later, lights come on from upstairs. His whole family is awake and asking what the duck that noise was. With the lights on, I can now see that there was nothing there. So that was my first experience with this Ouija board. Moving on to my senior year in high school, my dumbass ended up at that friend's house for another party and asked if I could have the Ouija board. Says yeah, and I become the owner of something that would make my house very active. So the home invasion starts with a realistic dream. I'm lying in my bed looking out my window, where I can see my neighbor's porch. You know how in dreams you know it's your house, but it looks all different? Yeah, not here, everything was identical. So I'm looking out the window, and everything is dark except for one light shining down on their porch, and all I see is a dark figure, all black with no eyes, even though it's the only thing in the light. Just mad dogging me, then it finally runs at me, and I wake up. Just a dream, right? The next few weeks got worse because my dad, brother, and I decided to do another seance, candles lit and all. But again, nothing happened with the board, but things started to get weird around the house. My room was what used to be an office, so it has a hole in the wall to the living room. I would get woken up at night by hearing what sounded like a ducking party in my living room, but with people from around the world speaking languages like Russian and German and anything other than English. This happened on maybe 3 occasions. Enough to make me start sleeping with my bat under my bed, lol. There were other times I would be lying down and see the light from the fridge being open, walk out there to see the fridge wide open, and nobody there. Or when I was in the shower, I would hear the door unlock and open, and then when I looked, it was still locked and shut. Sure, these things are weird, but nothing too crazy. That's what the next part is for, lol. One morning I'm getting ready for school at around 6 a.m. I'm always the only one awake at this time. I lean into the sink to get some water in my mouth after brushing my teeth. When I stand back up, I see a woman walking down the hallway reflected in my mirror. I nearly lost my breath, as it wasn't just a haze or a mist, but a fully formed human presence. You may be thinking it could have been your grandma or sister. Trust me, I checked the hall. No person, and my sister's room is on the other side of the house, where she was asleep, and my grandma was on oxygen, so her cord made noise going down the hall. This lady was so scary, but I never saw her face. Just that she had ratty brown hair and a long white nightgown. It gets weirder when a few nights later I'm hanging with my dad after my siblings have gone to bed. He proceeds to tell me that he was in the bathroom the previous night and was hanging a deuce at like 3 a.m. The door separating the sinks and shower space has been taken out, so it's all one room. He said his back was hurting, so he leaned forward. Upon doing this, he looked over and saw a woman in the medicine cabinet mirror looking at him as if she were a portrait. Mind you, this is before I told him about my encounter. And when he explained the lady, it was identical to what I had seen. To top things off, I saw her again at the same time right after getting some water. Same thing, she walks down the hallway, I go look after her, and nothing. Later that month my dad was putting some stuff in the attic, and he found something so disturbing. My grandpa put boards down so you can walk around to store stuff. On the last board there were sheets laid out with a bunch of shirts at the top of the sheets. Like a little bed with the shirts as a pillow. Even worse, the sheets and shirts had a fat depression, as if someone was actually sleeping there. Yeah, it freaked us all out. So I was finally convinced to give the Ouija board away, and really that was the end of the activity, until I went to college. The only thing that happened out at college was this last year, my senior year, and it's what most people call sleep paralysis. I believe this is a real thing, and if you don't know, it is when you awaken to see a dark figure of somebody, and you can't make a sound or move your body. The mind does weird things when you sleep, and on 2 of the 3 occasions this has happened to me, I think it was only sleep paralysis. But the first time was something else. I was lying down on the couch trying to take a nap, but the thing was that I was awake the whole time, so I don't see how sleep paralysis could have happened. I was facing the couch, which meant I couldn't see anything. But I was lying there, and I heard a giant swoosh of air, like the noise a movie would make if Batman came swooping in lol, and right as I go to turn around, I hear a growl and feel 2 hands going through my back and grabbing my lungs. I was frozen, I couldn't yell or fight back. All I wanted was to confront this thing, and I couldn't. It let go, and there was nothing there. Guess you could say I never got that nap in. This is everything I can remember happening to me, and I hope it scared you guys a little. It is all true, and I'd love to answer any questions you may have. My first encounter with the paranormal. When I was in 5th or 6th grade, I lived at my dad's house. And to get a full understanding of the story, I have to explain the house layout. So on the main floor, you walk through the side door, and directly in front of you are the stairs to the basement, and to your right is the kitchen, which is raised about 2 to 3 steps off the stoop. If you walk into the kitchen and turn left, the kitchen extends for about 15 to 20 feet until you reach the sink and fridge, which are located in a corner. Then to your left again, there is a bathroom straight ahead, and on either side are bedrooms. The left was my sister Alyssa's, and the right was mine. And before you get to the bathroom/bedroom area, there is a door on your left across from the living room, Dad's room, no kids allowed. To the right was the living room. Now that I'm done explaining that. The terrifying part, I have no idea why, but every night for a few months, maybe 2 to 3 months before the incident happened, I used to have the same dream every single night. The dream was the same every night and never changed. The dream was completely dark, with the only sound I could hear being the slow drip of water from the kitchen faucet. And every time I heard it, I would see it, a drop of water hit the pitch black floor and disappear. It was the same consistency, but the drops slowly and progressively got louder and louder until it was absolutely deafening, and then I'd wake up. One night I was having a dream, and I woke up and was lying on the floor. But I always slept on the floor by the register because I liked when the AC would blow into my blankets. My feet were probably 2 to 3 feet from my bedroom door. I just lay there debating whether or not to go back to sleep, knowing I'd have the same reoccurring dream. Then, it started. A light knock on my door. It was 3 knocks in all in a consistent pattern. Knock, knock, knock. I got up thinking it was Alyssa, just having a terrible dream, so I opened the door, and no one was there. Hello, Alyssa? Dad? I waited. No one answered me, so I closed my door and lay back down. 5 to 10 seconds pass, and another 3 knocks come, slightly louder this time, but still not very loud. I got up again thinking someone was messing with me, so I called out. No one. I left my room and checked around the house, the bathroom, Alyssa's room, the living room, and the kitchen. I flicked the basement lights on and looked down the stairs. I opened my dad's door, and there were no lights on and the TV was off. This is when I kind of started to get scared. I went back in my room and shut the door. I decided I was going to try and ignore it. Figuring if Alyssa or my dad were messing with me, they'd just get bored, I lay down and put my feet against my door just in case. 5 to 10 seconds later, another 3 knocks, louder but still soft, then again, louder. But not quite to the point of someone knocking on your front door. Again, and again, and again. For probably 25 to 30 minutes, rounds of knocking occurred every couple of seconds. The knocks gradually increased in volume and intensity. I could feel the door shaking against my feet with every single knock. At this point I was terrified and had no idea what to do. We had moved beyond the point of someone simply knocking on the front door and were now at the stage where someone was aggressively pounding on it. So I decided I was going to leave my room. Having no lock on it, I didn't feel very safe. I was going to go to the bathroom, a door I could lock. I got up after a knock and ran to the bathroom, which was next to my bedroom. I shut the door and locked it. Maybe 20 to 30 seconds passed, the banging started at the bathroom door. By now I was tearing up, because I seriously thought I might die at this point. I'm sitting on the tub, just staring at the bathroom door, watching it move and shake as whatever was on the other side was trying to get in. And it's still progressively getting more violent and louder. It got to the point where it looked like someone was shoulder checking the door. On the other side of that door, I hear extremely loud bangs, and I'm physically watching the door bow inwards towards me. I can hear the door cracking and popping, and I'm watching it flex away from the door frame. When it got to the point where it looked and sounded like someone was diving their full body weight into the door, I could hear it cracking and giving out. I lost it. I started bawling my eyes out, screaming. I thought I was going to die and that no one would know where I was or what happened to me. I just covered my ears, crying, head down with my eyes closed as tight as possible. 2 to 3 minutes went by of that, the door cracking and me screaming. Eventually I heard rapid knocking on the door and Alyssa yelling my name. I opened the door, and she was asking what happened, and she looked terrified. I just couldn't move, I was frozen in fear in that bathroom. Go get Dad was all I could say. I explained everything to them. My dad never believed me and told me it was all just a dream, that I was fine. I never felt safe in that house after that. Even after it was all over, I'd still hear faint knocking on my door every night, but I'd just try to ignore it and go back to sleep. Let me know what you guys think this could be. I've always just associated it with a ghost. I can also answer any questions you have, as this experience is burned into my brain. I thought I'd share what I believe to be my first ghost encounter. During October, cliché, I know, of 2023, I was hanging out with a friend and began asking her some questions tied to the paranormal. The subject has always piqued my interest, and I knew that she had actually had some experiences. My questions mainly focused on her experiences and her beliefs about how the paranormal world works, as I know that viewpoints can vary widely based on factors like religion and personal experience. I finally asked her something I'd been thinking about, and she was happy to answer. You see, one paranormal experience she had was when she and one of her other friends had used a homemade Ouija board, which she claimed had actually worked. So, with my interest in the subject of the paranormal being that of is it all actually real? I had asked her if we could do something similar. She agreed, and, after gathering the materials, we went out into the American Midwest countryside we called home, and by about sunset we arrived at our first location. We had set it up in her truck's bed, and I was quite literally trembling with anticipation and fear, and a bit of cold. We tried 3 times, but nothing happened. However, she did mention catching the eye reflection of what she claimed was a skinwalker. I also saw the reflection, however, it was too far for me to confirm what it was because, of course, it was. We were planning to see a movie after, so we left to see that, with the drive there consisting of her sharing more of her paranormal experiences and also quite a bit of talk of skinwalkers. After the movie, we went to a completely different area, and this is where the meat and potatoes of this post really happened. We had done the same setup, and I should mention that before we started, I pulled out my camera's flashlight because we were worried whatever we saw the first time had followed us. I kept it out so we could see what we were doing with the homemade Ouija board. We did the thing, and this time, I can't remember if it was the first or second try, but that's irrelevant, it worked. We had asked the spirit basic questions, their name is the only one I remember asking, though, and as we continued, my fear and dread continued to climb. I began looking around the area with my flashlight, believing to have felt the presence of a human nearby, and I still swear up and down that I heard breathing nearby that wasn't coming from either of us. My friend eventually told me to stop, as I could be pointing it at the spirit, and that if I was, doing so could anger it. We eventually said goodbye and left. As she drove me back home, we discussed what had happened and shared additional details about ghost encounters and ghosts in general, including a notable point she mentioned. If we saw something resembling a dark wall of shadow where it shouldn't be, that was likely a ghost, and we should look away from it. She also recommended I stay out of dark areas for a few days, which I vehemently did. In the end, I'm personally still a bit on the fence about whether or not ghosts and other paranormal beings really exist. However, after some time to sit on this story and getting the opinions of others, I've come to the conclusion that if they do, their intentions for staying on Earth probably aren't good. However, I'm sure you all won't be surprised to hear that I still have a morbid curiosity about it all, one that, if anything, has probably only grown since that encounter. If I'm being honest, despite my parents' warnings, of whom I told about all this, if that friend were to invite me to do this again, I probably wouldn't say no. In fact, I again might be the one to ask. I worked as a wilderness therapy guide for a primitive living skills program, spending weeks at a time leading kids through the backcountry, teaching survival skills, and making sure no one wandered off into oblivion. Every morning, my supervisor, Jay, sent GPS coordinates for the next campsite, and we would pack up our packs and move. I never knew our exact destination until I received the text. Except for this place. This was the only site I had memorized just so I could avoid it. It was beautiful, sure. A massive boulder at the top of a very large, gradually sloping knoll that overlooked a valley. The earth was deep red clay that had been speckled with large hunks of alabaster. Plenty of juniper tree cover provided shade and an anchor for setting up a shelter. The soft red sand made for easy sleeping, and the large sage bushes provided a wealth of useful items. A wash of cottonwood trees stretched down to the east, and the distance was framed by pink and white mountain ridges. It was a visually stunning sight, but something about it set off what I call my dog vibe, that deep, primal instinct that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I don't like to admit it, but I can be a huge, whiny baby. I'm tall, built like a brick shithouse, and spent my days hiking miles through brutal desert terrain. I felt tough. But this place? It made me feel bite-sized. I had spent one sleepless night at this site prior. There was something that gave the air a heavy feeling, and the surrounding geological structures created a strange impact on sound. This was the one location in the field where sounds would become heavily distorted. After setting foot in this place for the first time, I drew a big red X over the site on my map and jotted down the direct coordinates so that I could avoid it later down the line. Nothing exceptional happened the first night I stayed there, it was just my dog vibe telling me to run. That morning, I sat by the fire, boiling water with pineapple skins for tea, when my GPS pinged. I checked the coordinates that had been sent to my inReach. From just the degrees, I knew. I didn't even need to read the minutes and seconds. I dreaded where we were going. My supervisor had sent a message with the coordinates. Sorry, dude, I know. That stinky mother ducker. I showed my co-staff, Steve, the screen. He took one look and burst out laughing. What did you do to piss Jay off? Jay, our direct supervisor, was a good buddy of ours. After calling the office to request a location change, I was informed that apparently, we'd been hiking too fast, catching up to other groups, so they had to divert us. There was no other choice, and of course, we got sent straight to my least favorite place. The hike was a mild 8 miles, but by the time we arrived, the sun was setting, casting streaks across the technicolor clouds above the horizon, and the warm October air rustled in the treetops. We set up camp beneath a cavernous rocky outcrop at the apex of this hill. The campsite was a little less than a mile from the nearest service road. By the time we had finished setting up the camp, kids' shelter, staff shelters, fire pit, and sump, and chosen a safe location to hang our food bags for the night, it was time to get the kiddos set up for a nice hot meal. Every individual made their own food, but the food was always better hot. Only on the worst nights would you go to bed without a fire, and I would never stay at this site without one. The boys were absolute powerhouses when it came to firewood collection, which made my life easier. We had a perfect system. Every night each person would try to find and carry as much wood as they physically could, and the winner would get to lead our hike the next day. We were so efficient at collecting with it every morning we had to scatter the pile as an LNT, leave no trace, measure, which earned staff bonus pay if done correctly, and at that point in my life, I'd do almost anything for a few extra bucks. The wood was collected, camp was set, and as the sun dipped deeper behind the mesas on the horizon, the boys started busting a coal for the fire. The only sound was the high-pitched screech of a bow drill kit filling the air. That was when I felt it. The eyes. This part of the desert was full of life: elk, deer, coyotes, raccoons, and small rodents. No cattle, though. They never came this far out. I figured it was some scavenger waiting to comb the desert sands for dinner scraps. The night moved along, and we had all sat down to feast on our dinner and talk about our days. Part of the program was telling a fable or parable at some point in the day and having a group discussion about it. After everyone had finished cleaning their pots and hanging their pristinely packed food bags high in the trees, we stoked the fire and began our group discussion. At this point the world had been engulfed in darkness, and we could only see what the fire was illuminating. It was during this time that I felt an exponential increase in that feeling of being watched. It started once we put our bags down, but this was too much. I slowly scanned the surroundings to find the source of my unease. My eyes landed on a large sagebrush a distance from the fire directly in front of me. Then I saw them. A pair of eyes, peering from behind a sage bush, the firelight reflecting in the pupil. Only, they weren't animal eyes. They were human. Adrenaline slammed into my chest. That was a real-life person watching me, watching Steve. Watching my kids. I launched myself across the fire into the bush, flailing my arms and yelling as low, deep, and loudly as I could. After assaulting the poor shrubbery, Jay rolled out from behind the bush in stitches. That mother ducker, he had parked his Jeep 2 miles away and hiked in just to scare me. And it worked. I was not laughing. In fact, I had become a little bit of a spoilsport as I berated him for his poor life choices. I had to, he told the boys. This is her least favorite site. I couldn't resist. We spent the rest of the night joking around. The kids were cackling because they could never imagine what I would do when I was scared. After a while the little dudes went to sleep, and Steve, Jay, and I stayed by the fire, discussing the group's progress. Then, around 1 a.m., Steve went to bed. Jay turned to me. "Do you want to go on a little hike?" We walked 30 minutes up a ridge, following the service road to a little vista overlooking the entire valley. The desert stretched out below, reflecting silver in the waxing gibbous moonlight. Jay, being Jay, pulled out a pack of contraband cigarettes. Massive no-no in the field, but I was a filthy nicotine rat and not about to say no. If my supervisor wanted to give me contraband? Fine by me. We sat on a rock, backs to the road, lighting up. We talked about everything while taking long drags. We were on our second cancer stick when, from down the hill, we saw headlights. A pair of round, white-yellow lights appeared over a ridge, climbing the incline 500 yards away. There was something about this set of lights that sent my dog's vibe into hyperdrive. There was a pit in my stomach, but I thought it was just the anxiety of being caught red-handed with a cigarette. At this hour, it could only be a few things, and assuming from the headlight shape, it looked like a Jeep. It was probably the vehicle of a hunter scoping for the best spot to land their tag or someone lost. I remembered that it couldn't have been a company vehicle. We would have known if the company's transport vehicles were coming to meet us, so the anxiety should have left by now, but it was just increasing. Something was off. The car wasn't making a sound. No engine. No tires on dirt. No brakes squeaking. And in the desert, you could hear everything. The lights gradually floated forward, stopping 50 yards away. We shielded our eyes against the glare. We kept smoking. If it were someone from our company out this late, they would have been one of our friends, and we wouldn't care. But maybe it was just someone who needed directions? Then, as we got up to walk toward them, the lights moved back. The car was still positioned 50 yards away. We kept approaching, but the distance between us and the car stayed exactly the same. We paused our advance, taking in what we were looking at, and noticed the road curved left, descending down the hill. But the headlights, they were dead ahead. They were not following the road. This vehicle was not following the road? I started to become angry as this area was known for its cryptobiotic soil, and it's known that you tiptoe on the crypto if you have to touch it at all. How could someone be so obtuse that they would obliterate a colony of microorganisms that has been building its fortress for decades up to hundreds of years? I regained focus on what was happening and waved my arms to signal the vehicle to stop. I looked down at where we were standing to see if maybe they had lost the road backing up. I wanted to follow the tire tracks to see if any damage was done, and where we were standing now, the headlights had been. I focused on the ground but only saw Jay's and my footprints from our earlier hike. No tire treads, no marks. Jay saw what I was doing and tried to scan the surrounding ground for tread prints. As we were doing this, the lights did not move. In fact, they hovered, perfectly still. There was something about this situation, might have been related to my prior adrenaline dump earlier in the evening, where I felt the most dread and impending doom I have ever felt. Tears started flowing from my eyes, but I had no way to control them. I was not sad, maybe it was because of the fear? I grabbed Jay's arm. He looked at me. Neither of us spoke. We were each planning what to do next in our heads, our thoughts moving far too quickly to try to say something out loud. Then the lights split apart. One veered left. The other, right. They drifted slowly into the open desert, bobbing slightly up and down as they faded. The desert swallowed them whole. After standing in silence, acknowledging that we had both seen it and weren't insane, we turned back toward camp, hypervigilant as hell. As we passed the spot where the lights had vanished, a startlingly large owl seemed to materialize out of the dark and swoop silently over our heads. Jay flinched hard. Ha, ducker. I believed this was the universe paying him back. I'd never seen him react like that. I wasn't scared of animals, but Jay seemed terrified. Jay looked like he'd just seen a ghost. The chatting that we had been doing prior to seeing the owl had ended, and we made it back to camp in silence. I crawled into my bag next to a snoring Steve, and Jay grabbed his pack and set up his little nook fairly close to ours. I don't remember drifting into sleep, but I do remember waking up to the sounds of scrub jays chirping in the trees above us. In the early morning before the kiddos woke up, Jay, Steve, and I roused the fire before it was time to send Jay on his way. As the gentlewoman I am, I walked Jay back to his Jeep. Once we were far enough from camp, I broke the silence. What the actual duck happened last night? Jay didn't laugh. I've seen some weird shit before, he admitted. 4 years in the field, and yeah. I'm superstitious as hell. I'm just glad we got back in one piece, but I can see why you don't like it here. That's when he told me about owls. They're an omen of death, but not bad luck necessarily, he said, at least, in my culture. I reached forward and gave him a quick hug while saying, well, thanks for coming out last night, man, and I'm sorry for launching myself before I realized who you were. He laughed, remembering how he provoked me to Hulk smash a sage bush, and that eased the tension. After a few minutes of joking, we parted ways. There was another week of hiking until I finished my shift, but it was uneventful, and nothing strange or weird happened. I still think about this every now and then, but I never stopped wondering. There were no tire tracks. No sound. Just lights in the desert that shouldn't have been there. My first paranormal experience. I'm sharing my experience because I want help. I want to know if I'm just seeing things or not. I really want to know how I see what I see and if others see things similarly or not. I first encountered something when I was a little kid. I used to see dolls in the family hallway move, and every now and then I would see a figure on top of me at night. It was 2 years ago when I saw a tall woman in my house, a dress on, but I couldn't see her face. Ever since I was younger, I have had these vivid images of things that would happen. For example, me and my whole family were on vacation at a Big Four holiday park here in Australia. Things went bad, and my parents started arguing, so bad to the point they decided to split up. That's not important. My dad called my nan to pick him up, but I and one of my sisters decided to go with him. That left my mom and my other sister alone together. To get home, you had to go through a notoriously bumpy road with lots of potholes and lots of gutters and dips in the road. I imagined and saw in vivid imagery my mother and sister in a large impact with another car. I still get these images of things that could happen, things that occur, sometimes bad, sometimes not. It's not even déjà vu, because I can remember what I dreamt about, and I can change what happens, and I don't get déjà vu when I've experienced the dream firsthand. Another example is a student a few years older than me at my high school had a brain aneurysm and passed away. I dreamt that, about a month or so before it happened, I didn't know who he was, I didn't recognize him, but when I saw the memorial the school made for him, I recognized him. For a bit of context for the following example, every year a grade gets an end-of-year trip. My grade is going to Sydney for a couple of days. A month ago, before we found out about going to Sydney, I had a vivid dream of me and my friends at Wet End Wild, a water park we are going to be going to in a couple of months. No one knew what we were doing, but I had this image of it, of the experience I'm going to have. I still get these dreams. I had one yesterday of my friend falling down the stairs and grazing his knee at school. I don't know when it's going to happen, all I know is it will happen. Could be tomorrow, could be a month or two from now. I can usually tell if it's going to happen or if it's about to happen. Sometimes I'm not even there to experience it. But I can see it. I don't even know if I saved my sister and mum from that car crash, or if it is still to come. All I know is it hasn't happened yet, and it was avoided because I told my dad I wanted my auntie to come and pick mum up because she wasn't in the right headspace to drive. I've always experienced the paranormal, and I find it amazing, but it's starting to get stronger. I'm starting to experience these dreams more, and I'm starting to sense or see things in the dark, or in my house, or out and about, which I haven't before. Does anyone know what I'm experiencing? Does anyone know how it works or how to help me?